Without further objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The committee will be conducting two forms of business today. First, we will hold a brief business meeting in order to consider an oversight report drafted by the committee. Second, we will hold an oversight hearing on matters relating to veterans' eligibility for care. Before we proceed to the business meeting, I would like to go over some items for our members participating remotely. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to use the video function for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee, and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for a couple of seconds before speaking so that we will be able to hear everything you say. In order to ensure everything members say is captured on the live stream of this hearing, I ask that members pause for 2 to 3 seconds before beginning to speak. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the conduct of the business meeting or oversight hearing with members participating remotely? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the business meeting portion of today's proceedings. The House Committee on Veterans Affairs has been called to order. A quorum is present. Today, we will consider the adoption of a report prepared by the committee titled Hijacking Our Heroes, Exploiting Veterans Through Disinformation on Social Media. The draft report has been available to members for at least 24 hours. Therefore, pursuant to Clause 1B(2) of Rule 11, it is considered as read and is open to amendment at any time. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Last year, the committee began investigating the issue of spoofing, which is the act of disguising an electronic communication from an unknown source to make the communication look like it is from a known trusted source. This can happen either by creating a fraudulent account or by stealing a real account, and is one of the primary tactics to infiltrate social media networks. This allows dishonest individuals or even entities associated with foreign governments to easily reach into unsuspecting American homes to spread disinformation and perpetuate scams. Over the past several years, there has been an increasing awareness of how foreign actors have sought to infiltrate and influence our elections. Manipulation of social media networks is a major source of news and information. Let me say it again. Manipulation of social media networks, a major source of news and information, has become the primary tool for such influence. Further, the committee's investigation was guided by evidence which shows that veterans are particularly targeted for spoofing as they wield considerable influence and credibility in their communities, earned by virtue of their service to our country. Whether in California, Tennessee, or Washington, D.C., veterans are a trusted community and are listened to because of their experience and expertise in areas related to the military and national security. Rightly, they become important voices in their communities. Now, as part of the committee's investigation, a hearing was held on November 13th, 2019, which examined the risks faced by our nation's veterans when using social media. At the hearing, members heard about extensive spoofing perpetuated against a veteran service organization and the Byzantine efforts required to try and address the problems. Members also heard from social media companies, Facebook and Twitter, directly on the policy and legal challenges involved. Members also heard from an expert on the issue of online threats. Committee members later participated in a closed roundtable discussion with the FBI, which has the primary law enforcement responsibility for internet fraud and crimes, including those conducted through social media. Social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have enormous reach through their millions of daily users. The steady growth of internet access and mobile technology has made social media accessible to most people around the world. And over the past year, committee staff developed a report chronicling and analyzing what we learned from the hearing, the roundtable, and many relevant documents sought during the investigation. The report details the committee's findings, including the rise in problems such as spoofing. The committee's report describes how foreign actors steal veterans' voices and images in order to manipulate political opinions. Unsuspecting citizens could have their political judgments swayed by foreign voices posing as American veterans. By impersonating veterans, these foreign actors are effectively eroding the hard-earned power and integrity of veterans' voices. The report also describes the risks of financial fraud that veterans face on social media. These include romance scams, where fraudsters misappropriate the identities or images of veterans to seduce unsuspecting victims before trying to coerce money from them, and commercial fraud, where fake products are hawked under the guise of patriotism. And once again, veterans are a major target. The report also outlines a series of policy recommendations and other potential solutions. Some of these steps can and should be taken by the social media platforms themselves. The executive branch, including law enforcement, could pursue additional complementary goals. Congress can also consider certain legislative changes to directly address information sharing between the social media platforms and law enforcement while continuing to defend and protect the privacy of users. All of these steps should involve discussions with the veteran community, including interested veteran service organizations. Social media platforms play an important role in the public discourse, and I continue to believe that protecting our freedoms of speech and innovation are fundamental. Now, let me be clear. This issue has nothing to do with censoring political views or removing content based on partisan bias. This is about impersonation and fraud and the theft of veterans' voices. Pretending to be a veteran for any reason is shameful, but it is especially shameful when such deception is used to spread disinformation or commit financial fraud. There is a very real and growing problem here, and we need to work together across all viewpoints to determine how to mitigate the risks and keep online spaces as a place for robust exchange of ideas and information. Now, this report is the first committee report of my chairmanship and the first such report from the committee in many years. This committee has a long history of engaged and robust oversight into matters affecting veterans, and this is one such area. I look forward to the committee conducting more oversight work on emerging areas of veteran impact, and I hope such work leads to more insightful and informative reports, such as the one before you today. Due to the importance of the issue, the report deserves a place in the official record of the committee, and I therefore urge my colleagues to vote in favor of its approval.
We need to have you pause for a second and see if you can talk to anybody to try to get Mr. Sablon remotely, because we're having some technical issues. Just say, hey, I'm going to pause for a second to make sure we have connectivity.
Okay. I do need to indulge the committee in pausing for a moment because we're having connectivity issues with one of our members.
Yeah.
So let's
try to get to just ask Mr. Sablon if he has.
Mr. Sablon, do you have a question?
I can hear you, Chairman Takano. I can see you and hear you now. Now I can.
Okay. So your
Thank you.
connection, you now have connectivity with us.
Yes, yes, I do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Perfect. Should we proceed? Okay. All right. Dr. Rowe, I now would like to recognize you for any remarks that you may have to offer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Veterans, like all users of social media, are targets for disinformation campaigns and scams. Without a doubt, junk is proliferating on the internet. If you don't believe that, just take a look at your Facebook page. None of us need research studies to tell us that, though there are many. I agree with the majority that educating veterans about social media safety through public service announcements and fostering partnerships between social media platforms and veteran service organizations should be encouraged. However, I have serious concerns with aspects of this investigation and with many of the report's recommendations that leave me unable to support it today. Minority was not involved in the scoping of this investigation. Some interviews conducted during the investigation and drafting of this report. It's unreasonable to expect that such an investigation will produce a bipartisan result, and this certainly wasn't one. On November 13, 2019, we held a full committee oversight hearing on Vietnam Veterans of America report concerning disinformation and fraud campaigns targeting veterans. At that hearing, VVA, Facebook, Twitter, and the research firm Graphica testified. Afterwards, committee members had a non-transcribed briefing from the Justice Department and the FBI to learn about current federal law enforcement practices relating to spoofing and data sharing. Finally, majority staff held interviews with Graphica and Twitter, important meetings that are cited throughout the report without inviting the minority staff. Despite this limited record, the majority has written a report that delves very deeply into issues that are clearly beyond this committee's jurisdiction and expertise that exists elsewhere in Congress, as evidenced by the work that the Judiciary and Energy and Commerce Committee have been doing for years, and I'm not comfortable with that. The Veterans Affairs Committee's role is to improve the quality and timeliness of care, benefits, and services provided to veterans and their families. It's not appropriate for this committee to make recommendations about how social media companies should develop better policies to combat spoofing and disinformation, or how federal privacy laws could be changed to make it easier to share information with law enforcement. To be clear, I am by no means minimizing the threat of disinformation and scams on social media that target the veteran community. It is very real and a persistent threat. For example, Mr. Chairman, we have discussed your desire to establish a new office within the VA to educate veterans about social media safety. That is clearly within the jurisdiction of this committee, and if I were returning to Congress next year, I would look forward to that discussion. Unfortunately, this report misses the mark by straying largely into matters that, unlike that one, are outside of our jurisdiction and expertise. I also have serious concerns that this report fails to appreciate the implications and complexities of the recommendations it is making, and I fear that in an effort to address spoofing, the report's recommendations could unintentionally undermine free speech. In just the past few months, we've seen examples of social media platforms censoring conservative voices. I'm concerned that the report's use of examples of content that is associated with conservative views and labeling it as, quotes, political propaganda and socially divisive content, end quotes, could further target legitimate debate for content moderation in the name of combating spoofing. Moreover, the report's commentary on paid advertising, and I quote, loopholes, end quote, as Twitter implies that the platform should ban ads related to social issues such as climate change, gun control, and abortion to combat spoofing. More speech, not less, is how democracy thrives. The report also acknowledges deficiencies in Facebook's fact-checking policies, which many believe contribute to the censorship of conservative voices, while at the same time suggesting the platform must do more. Other congressional committees have recently highlighted that better transparency in fact-checking process is needed. Congress needs to understand that process to ensure that content is not moderated based on one's viewpoint. Lastly, I believe the majority's recommendations related to collecting and sharing social media users' identity, affiliations, geolocation information with law enforcement and other users has privacy and potentially Fourth Amendment implications that this committee has not examined and lacks the expertise to fully evaluate. For these reasons, I will not be supporting this report, and I recommend that my colleagues do not either. I will conclude with this. As I said at last year's hearing, no government agency or private entity can fully protect veterans from the potentially malicious actors online or otherwise. We have to be our own first line of defense. Everyone, veteran and non-veteran alike, should take a close and critical look at posts, news feeds, messages, and videos that we find online. Not everything you read online is true or accurate, whether it aligns with your worldview or not. I think we all understand that clearly. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Dr. Rowe. I understand that Mr. Bilirakis would like to be recognized for a comment. Mr. Bilirakis, are you remote?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the majority's intention to recognize the negative impacts that social media spoofing has on veterans. And I understand and agree that the U.S. must combat foreign interference and disinformation campaigns. I also hope that Congress can work together in a bipartisan fashion to address legitimate social media spoofing concerns in a way that helps our veterans as well as all Americans. However, the only current member of this committee, I am the only current member of this committee who also sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I have concerns that this report was not written in a bipartisan manner, and I join in dissenting that this goes well beyond this particular committee's jurisdiction. For the past two Congresses, the Energy and Commerce Committee has been building a record of actively engaging in internet content regulation policy, including the Communications Decency Act, the CDA, Section 230. This record also includes questioning CEOs Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey directly at the full committee level, hearing from high-profile social media users who felt marginalized and engaging with social media company policies and practices. I know conversations regarding potential changes to CDA Section 230 are ongoing, and this issue will continue to be discussed and addressed in the Energy and Commerce Committee moving forward. I remain hopeful that we will forge bipartisan solutions together with the committee to solve these legitimate questions about consumer protection and internet content. Unfortunately, this report suggests some recommendations with potential legislative changes in which we would have no jurisdiction or expertise. In fact, if we were to draft a bill containing the majority of these recommendations, it would likely not even see VA committee jurisdiction referral at all. And I view this as highly inappropriate. Even more so, some recommendations within the report propose broad-based restrictions that some of my colleagues and I believe could pose threats to free speech through censorship and removal of legitimate discourse, as well as contain valid privacy concerns. For example, recommendation number 7 contains a wholesale approach to geolocation and verification that could have large unintended consequences with regard to privacy and free speech. Specifically, having geolocation available for all users to the general public has endangerment concerns, such as stalking and domestic violence. I don't see how public sharing of this information addresses the underlying issue when internal use of this information can and has already helped identify spoofing and aid in the removal of verified spoof accounts. Two of the recommendations I can agree solely with and has this committee's jurisdiction. Dr. Rowe referred to a couple of them as well, and I would certainly be open to exploring these paths further. But in the end, I cannot voice my support for this report overall, and I do suggest we move forward in validating these issues that largely fall outside of our jurisdiction. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time, and I'll yield back. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Belarakis, for your comments. Are there any other members who wish to comment on the report? I'll wait a few seconds for our members that are participating remotely. Before I move to a consideration of the vote, let me just respond to comments made by the minority members. I appreciate your comments, and your comments will be included. But I do want to point out that majority staff provided a draft report to the minority staff on Friday, August 7th, which is more than 16 weeks ago. And further, this report is based on a hearing we presided over together a year ago, as well as a roundtable. And members from both sides of the aisle were very engaged in these official committee events. Minority staff has had access to all the information and attended the briefings. However, despite multiple offers to engage in a review and revision process of the draft, minority staff declined to offer feedback or provide input. So again, I will say that I appreciate the comments made today. We'll include them, but it was the minority's decision not to participate in finalizing this report, and I'm disappointed that we cannot move forward, on a bipartisan stamp of the report. So I will once ask if there's any further debate before we move on. And I hear none. I now recognize Mr. Levin to make a motion.
I move that the report be approved and reported favorably to the House.
The question is on the motion to approve the report and report it favorably to the House. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those in favor say, all those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, with the ayes have it and the motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion is to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the committee staff are authorized to make technical and conforming changes to reflect the action of the committee in adopting the resolutions embodying our rules of procedure. Does the ranking member or any other member seek recognition before we conclude?
Dear Mr. Chairman, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, I give notice of intent to file minority, supplemental, additional, or dissenting views on the report.
The business meeting, without objection, shall be concluded, and we will now move to the oversight hearing portion of today's proceedings. The committee is called to order, and we will now move to our oversight hearing to discuss veteran eligibility to enroll in the Department of Veterans Affairs healthcare system. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Dr. Rowe, this is very much likely our last time that we will share this dais together. And thinking about that has made me reflect on the work that you and I have done and the friendship that has formed between a Tea Party candidate and member, caucus member, and a member of the Progressive Caucus. Imagine that. Who could have, it would have been easy for us, being on such opposite ends of the political spectrum, to allow partisan politics to overshadow the need to care for veterans. And while we did not always see eye to eye, we always found a way to work past those differences and make good policy for veterans and their families. And this is a direct reflection on your leadership. And I have to say, I regret that I did not discover John Prine much earlier in our relationship. I've become a great admirer, and it took a pandemic and his untimely death, or his unfortunate death, for me to understand what a treasure he was to our country and how much you admired him. You've been a member of this committee for 12 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that's 2 years longer than you promised the constituents of East Tennessee, but you're forgiven for that. And we appreciate the wisdom of your constituents. And while you've been the chairman or ranking member of this committee, we have passed 58 bills out of the House and into law. 58. And with any luck, we'll have an additional 33 provisions included in the appropriations end of year package. My deep regret that we couldn't get more Senate. It's always the Senate. Always the Senate. We could have, it's like, I wish, it wasn't buried in an appropriations vehicle. Your legacy, and that's one thing we both can agree on, it's like the true enemy sometimes is the other side, the Senate. Your legacy will live on in this committee for years, and you led and got passed into law several transformational bills, including the Mission Act and the Forever GI Bill, appeals modernization. You led and should get credit as well for the passage of the Blue Water Navy, Vietnam Veterans Act. And most recently, your work to include the Staff Sergeant Parker Gordon Fox Suicide Prevention Grant Program into S-785 shows your commitment and connection to your constituency. Your story about Staff Sergeant Fox touched everyone who heard it. I truly hope the bipartisan nature of our relationship is an example for other members to follow, because to me, that could very well be the most important aspect of your legacy. So I now recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for those kind words. I very much appreciate it. And Chairman Takano and I, along with other members, visited Afghanistan over Thanksgiving in 2015. And how could you not be a friend of someone who used all of his frequent flyer miles so you could move up on the air flight back and have a much better flight? I've always appreciated that. He did that for all the members. I think Mike Kaufman was with us, and it was a great visit. It was certainly great visiting the troops in Afghanistan over Thanksgiving. And as this is my last hearing, I wanted to start by saying how grateful I am to have the privilege of serving my fellow veterans on this committee for the past 12 years. And with also would be remiss if I didn't thank the staffs of both the majority staff and the minority staff. Both have been incredibly respectful to me, to this committee, and have served veterans very well. And I don't think our constituents and veterans understand the service that our staff does for us. They prepare these documents for us, do research, and we could not do our job without them. And to my fellow members on the minority, I could not be more thankful for the effort that you all have put in. Dan, you're a new member of the committee, but boy, you've been a diligent member of the committee, as has this entire committee, and Mike and Mr. Bost and General Bergman and others who are here remotely today. I can't thank you enough, and this has been truly an honor of a lifetime to have done this. I'll never forget the friendships that I've made with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, with our sparring partners in the Senate, and with those veteran service organizations, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and across the public and private sectors. Nor will I forget the incredible veterans, the caregivers, the military families, and passionate professionals that I met visiting medical centers, regional offices, cemeteries, memorials from Long Island to Los Angeles, and beyond during my time as chairman, now ranking member. And I recall a conversation I had with a staff member, Christine Hill, as we were driving in West LA on the 405. And I said, Christine, we were in a Chevy Impala. And I said, what did you do when you were in the service? She said, I flew B-1 bombers. And I said, well, we're not in the B-1 bomber, we're in the Chevy Impala. So we slowed down a little bit. I will forever be proud of the work that we have done together. and to improve the life of our nation's heroes and families. And I will say this, that almost, and I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, you've done the same thing. When I've traveled around the country, I almost always never go someplace that a veteran doesn't walk up and say, you know, the VA is better now. And I'm sure you've heard it, and I've heard it. I've heard it at home. I've heard it all across this country. And I think it has to do with the bipartisan work we've done here. And I think we should take and rightfully great pride in that. I'll forever be proud of the work we've done. And for my last time in Congress is coming to an end, and that work will certainly continue. But I know that my fellow veterans and I are in good hands with members and staff of this committee, and I'll be cheering you on from afar as you continue the hard work of ensuring that our grateful nation fulfills its solemn obligation to the brave men and women who've defended our democracy, secured our freedoms, and sometimes at great personal cost. I hope that that hard work will include the continuation of the conversation we'll start today concerning eligibility. As I mentioned in my comments during this morning's business meeting, this committee's core mission is to consider how to best meet the needs of those who serve. Eligibility is central to meeting those needs and that mission. Yet the current enrollment priority group system, which governs the veterans are eligible to enroll to receive care at the VA, has remained largely unchanged since it was created in 1996, almost 25 years ago. I urge all of you to take a moment and think back to the world that existed 25 years ago. It was before 9/11. It was before the world of iPhones, a world where the nature of warfare, military service, and modern medicine looked virtually nothing like they do today. Yet a veteran's eligibility to receive care from the VA healthcare system looks virtually the same as it did then. You will note that I said virtually not the same and not entirely the same because Congress has acted from time to time since 1996 to incrementally expand eligibility in one form or another to certain groups of veterans, including those who served in combat, those who experienced military sexual trauma, and those who have received other than honorable discharges from the military. However, there have been no comprehensive examinations or reforms made to the current enrollment priority system in that time. That has led, in my opinion, to a deepening disconnect between the eligibility system that we have and the veteran community it is meant to serve. That disconnect could be clearly seen in our committee's activities this Congress. Our debates about increasing diversity of the veteran population have been debates about eligibility. Our debates about suicide prevention have been debates about eligibility. Our debates about toxic exposure have been debates about eligibility. Our debates about character of discharge have been debates about eligibility. That's why I introduced H.R. 7469, the Modernizing Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Act, earlier this year. My bill would establish a bipartisan commission that would be tasked with assessing veterans' eligibility for care in the VA healthcare system and making recommendations to VA, Congress, and the American people about how eligibility could be improved. The bill is based on a recommendation made in 2016 by the Commission on Care, which rightly noted in their final report that, quote, substantial changes have occurred since Congress last comprehensively examined eligibility for care that merit a reexamination of VA health care, end quote. To address that, the Commission on Care recommended that an expert body be established to develop recommendations for VA eligibility. My bill would do exactly that. The Commission on Care was fully bipartisan. Its membership included veterans, veteran service organizations, healthcare experts, and its work was widely heralded 4 years ago by Republicans, Democrats, and veteran advocates. That said, straying from the status quo is never easy. So I want to take a moment to address some of the misconceptions that I've seen in the testimony. First, establishing an independent commission is in no way akin to abdicating or outsourcing the essential role that Congress plays in determining eligibility. The commission would be tasked only with examining eligibility and making recommendations on how to improve it. It would then, of course, be incumbent on Congress to do its job to consider or dismiss those recommendations and make any statutory changes that Congress deemed appropriate. Second, the idea that this proposal is intended to restrict care to veterans and privatize the VA healthcare system to save money is patently false. I do not believe that the Commission on Care, which included commissioners who lead some of the same veteran service organizations who are testifying here today, made their recommendation out of any desire to cut off care to veterans in need. And I assure you That was not my intent when drafting this legislation. The goal of this bill is to improve eligibility so that it works better for more veterans. I hope that that's a goal that we can all support. I appreciate all the thoughtful testimony that's been provided for today's hearing. I look forward to a productive conversation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Let's move on to introducing our witnesses. This morning, we will hear from Siddharth Panangala, a specialist in veterans policy with the Congressional Research Service. Patrick Murray, Director, National Legislative Service, Veterans of Foreign Wars. Marquise Bearfield, Legislative Director, Disabled American Veterans. Roscoe Butler, Associate Legislative Director, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and Mario Marquez, National Director, Veterans Affairs and Rehabilitation of the American Legion. Mr. Panangala, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give your remarks.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me. Good morning, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Dr. Rowe, and distinguished members. My name is Siddharth Panangala from the Congressional Research Service. I'm honored to appear before the committee today. As requested by the committee, my testimony will highlight major legislative milestones pertaining to VA healthcare. CRS takes no position on the Commission on Care recommendation or any legislative proposals to examine veterans' eligibility for care. I would request that my full written statement be included in the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The modern-day VA healthcare system could be traced back to the end of World War I. At that time, with the return of a large number of World War I veterans requiring hospital care for their service-connected injuries, Congress established the hospital system to provide hospital care, and I quote, for injuries or diseases contracted or aggravated by the person's military service, end quote. The World War Veterans Act of 1924 included expanded eligibility for wartime veterans without service-connected conditions, provided there was space available at a VA hospital and the veterans signed an oath indicating they were unable to pay for their care. During World War II, VA's hospital system was rapidly expanded to meet the medical needs of this new generation of returning veterans with their injuries. And Public Law 7810, enacted on March 17, 1943, made hospital care and other medical benefits similar to World War I. That is, hospital care was available to veterans with service-connected disabilities during war, and for veterans without service-connected conditions, provided space was available in VA hospitals, and VA signed an oath, and the veterans signed an oath indicating they were unable to pay. By the 1960s, VA's hospital care was provided for three classes of veterans. One, those suffering from service-connected disability. Two, those who had a service-connected disability but now needed care for some other disability, provided there was a bed available in a VA or the federal hospital. And three, for those suffering from non-service connected disabilities and who were financially unable to pay for hospitalization. In 1973, with the passage of the Veterans Healthcare Expansion Act, Congress further extended outpatient care to non-service connected veterans to obviate the need for hospital admission. By 1985, VA was authorized to provide most categories of veterans with hospital care, nursing home care, and domiciliary care. However, the VA was not obligated or required to do so. This is evidenced by the use of the phrase may provide in the statutes. With the enactment of the Consolidated Budget, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1985, Congress established three categories of eligibility for VA care. The law provided that hospital care shall be provided free of charge to veterans with Category A. These Category A veterans were those defined to include those with service-connected disabilities, low-income veterans without such disabilities, and certain exempt veterans, including, for example, prisoners of war, those exposed to Agent Orange, and recipients of VA pension and Medicaid and eligible for Medicaid. The Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Reform Act of 1996 created the modern eligibility and enrollment system that is in use today. The context for that reform was driven by three major factors. One was the complex eligibility rules that created numerous challenges in delivering care. At the same time, President Clinton's administration had proposed reform in the nation's healthcare system. And three, a Blue Ribbon Commission set up by the then VA Secretary in 1990 presented proposals which included recommendations for restructuring the system. The Eligibility Reform Act eliminated distinction between eligibility for inpatient care and outpatient care, and did require VA to manage the provision of hospital care and medical services through an enrollment system based on prioritization and available resources. So also, once a veteran meets that eligibility criteria, enrollment in the VA healthcare system is not guaranteed. The law was very clear that the intent of those provision of healthcare dependent on available resources. Since the law's enactment, from time to time, Congress has enacted legislation provided limited eligibility to certain categories of veterans for specific conditions or specific services under special treatment authority. In conclusion, since the 1920s, VA's role and mission to provide health care to the nation's veterans have changed significantly. What started out as a hospital and domiciliary care system for injuries or diseases incurred or aggravated by a person's wartime military service has evolved into a comprehensive healthcare system, not only providing primary care, specialized medical care, nursing home care, both inside and outside of its facilities, but also conducting medical research, educating healthcare professionals, and serving as a backup to the nation's emergency during healthcare emergencies and disasters. While Congress has changed the eligibility for care in response to the needs of veterans and the changing nature of war, it has also had to grapple with the central policy question pertaining to VA care. That is, which veteran should be eligible for care, under what circumstances, while at the same time striking a balance between the budgetary constraints and a grateful nation's attempts to repay the indebtedness to those who served in the military. This concludes my statement, Chairman and Ranking Member Dr. Rowe, and I would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penangala, for your testimony. Mr. Murray, you are recognized for 5 minutes to give your remarks.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee, on behalf of the men and women of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to provide views on this important subject. First, the VFW would like to thank Ranking Member Rowe for his years of service to our country. Dr. Rowe served his country in uniform and afterwards in Congress. His leadership as both the chairman and ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs is something the VFW will always be appreciative of. We wish him well in his future endeavors. The VFW is grateful to be included in this discussion today, and we welcome every opportunity to improve or streamline access to health care and benefits for the millions of men and women who have served our country. The VFW believes eligibility is an important issue as it directly affects our members and other veterans who wore the uniform. While we believe the overall system can be improved upon, the VFW cannot support HR 7469 at this time. We understand VA's eligibility standards may not be perfect and could be improved or streamlined, but we do not think a complete overhaul of the system is called for at this point. We also do not think a proposed commission is the way to accomplish that goal. Commissions like the one described in this proposal are needed when subject matter experts are required. The VFW feels as if changes are needed for eligibility, there's more than enough knowledge and expertise between Congress, their staffs, veteran groups, and veteran healthcare providers that an expert commission is unnecessary. Frankly, for this specific issue, collectively, we are the Commission for Eligibility and an outside commission. VA Mission Act created the AIR Commission to gather data on physical VHA facilities, the veterans they serve, and the needs in those areas. The VFW supported the establishment of this commission to assess the physical infrastructure of VA and its areas that need growth or resizing. The AIR Commission was necessary because the entire veteran community does not necessarily have an in-depth knowledge or expertise regarding infrastructure needs. The results will provide a valuable assessment and insight into the capability and capacity of VHA, which could lead to future discussions on eligibility for healthcare. The VFW has warned Congress not to rush the AIR process because it could cause irreparable harm to the care and benefits America provides its veterans. According to VHA's COVID-19 response report, as of July 2019, over 9 million veterans were enrolled in VA healthcare. Between October 2018 and June 2020, approximately 6.3 million veterans used VHA. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, veteran unemployment rate has risen and individuals have lost their private insurance. Veterans are forced to seek other means for healthcare coverage. This surge in patients will further increase VHA's workload and add stress to an already strained system. This is an ongoing issue and may continue for the foreseeable future until this pandemic is passed. We don't think major changes to VHA should occur until at least the final assessment has done of the pandemic and the increased population it caused. It's also vital these veterans do not fall through the cracks of a system that's created to help them. When veterans apply for enrollment, they're asked about service-connected conditions, current employment status, previous calendar year gross annual household income, and additional demographic and geographic information. This information is used to place a veteran into the appropriate priority group. However, the form can be confusing and may not accurately portray the veteran's current situation, which can cause delays in care, incorrect priority group placement, or ineligibility due to previous year's income. The VFW has urged VA to fast track the application of these veterans who recently became unemployed so they may receive treatment quickly and have access to health care. Multiple pieces of legislation have allowed for significant changes to VHA enrollment eligibility to help bridge the VA healthcare gap for veterans, regardless of their priority. The VFW supported both the John Scott Hannon and the Compact Act as they both align with our resolutions and legislative priorities to urge Congress to dedicate adequate resources to address suicide prevention and mental health treatment. Time is needed to evaluate the outcomes of these programs, studies, and reports to gauge the effectiveness before there's an overhaul of VHA's priority group system. The VFW would prefer to see a proposal with a specific directive, examples such as diminished or expanded eligibility or consolidating priority groups. We think the goal of the proposed commission is not sufficiently defined, which could lead to creating solutions for problems that do not exist. The VFW welcomes the discussion to improve care and access to care by modifying existing eligibility requirements, especially for emergency situations. But we do not think the entire system needs an overhaul. The VFW is consistently supportive of efforts to streamline or expand eligibility so as many veterans receive quality care as possible. However, this particular proposal is just a little too vague for the VFW to support at this time. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, this concludes my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to present the VFW's input today. I look forward to engaging in any further discussion you or the members of the committee may have on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. I would now like to recognize Mr. Bearfield for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting DAV to testify about veterans' eligibility to enroll in the VA healthcare system. As you know, DAV has more than 1 million members, almost all of whom rely heavily on VA for their healthcare. So a VA healthcare system is of paramount importance to us. Mr. Chairman, prior to the enactment of the Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Reform Act of 1996, VA had very complicated eligibility criteria that unnecessarily hindered its ability to provide comprehensive, high quality, and cost-effective healthcare. VA was generally limited to treating service-connected conditions in hospital settings, and clinicians were unable to treat the whole veteran. Former VA Undersecretary for Health, Dr. Ken Kaiser, called the VA healthcare system in the mid-1990s highly dysfunctional. Dr. Kaiser led an effort to transform VA into a modern outpatient-based system that provided comprehensive primary and preventative care. Central to this plan was the passage of eligibility reform that opened up VA healthcare to almost all veterans and spurred transition to outpatient care. Together with other management and clinical changes, these reforms revolutionized the VA and greatly expanded access and improved quality. For the past 2 decades, Congress has maintained its support for the core principles of the 1996 reform, while also making a number of modifications to further expand eligibility. For example, veterans who served in a theater of combat operations now have eligibility for care for 5 years from discharge. Congress expanded eligibility for non-VA provided community care with the Veterans Choice Act and the VA Mission Act. Most recently, Congress extended eligibility for emergency mental health care to all veterans in suicidal crisis with the Veterans Compact Act. And today, this committee is considering enhanced healthcare eligibility for veterans exposed to toxic exposures and veterans who received other than honorable discharges. DAV supports both of these proposals. As VA's quality and reputation rose after the 1996 eligibility reforms, millions of veterans enrolled in the system. However, from time to time, there have been proposals floated to scale back eligibility in order to limit federal spending on veterans' health care, though none has received much support. We are grateful that this committee and Congress, under the leadership of both parties, has remained committed to fully funding VA, even during the toughest fiscal years, rather than scaling back eligibility. Mr. Chairman, the committee today is also reviewing H.R. 7469, the Modernizing Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Act, which would create an independent commission and make recommendations for changing VA healthcare eligibility. We appreciate Dr. Rowe's intentions to establish a future-oriented review that might strengthen veterans' healthcare, almost a bookend to his work on the Asset and Infrastructure Review legislation. But while we were pleased to work closely with Dr. Rowe and his staff on the AIR Act, which includes an independent commission on VA infrastructure, we do not believe a commission on eligibility is neither necessary nor advisable. The AIR Commission was appropriate because multiple prior attempts to realign and modernize VA's inadequate infrastructure had failed, and the consequences are serious. By contrast, we have not been made aware of any systematic problems stemming from eligibility that are comparable to the VA's current infrastructure challenges or the pre-1996 eligibility dysfunction that Dr. Kaiser described. We see no compelling reasons to stand up another commission when this committee and Congress already have the expertise and experience to debate and make necessary changes as we are doing today. Eligibility is about, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, the central principles of eligibility are an expression of the obligation our nation owes to the men and women who serve and will serve in the future. Eligibility is about fulfilling the promises made to those who wear the uniform and how we prioritize the obligation of the federal government. We feel strongly that these decisions are the responsibility of our elected representatives. Only if Congress finds itself unable to properly exercise these functions could an outside, unelected, and unaccountable commission even be considered. Such is not the case today, and for these reasons, DAV opposes H.R. 7469. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony, and I will be happy to respond to any questions the committee may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Bearfield. I will now move to Mr. Jeffrey Steele, not Mario Vasquez, as I had indicated earlier. Mr. Steele, I want to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of National Commander James W. Bill Oxford and our nearly 2 million dues-paying members, we thank you for inviting the American Legion to testify today. I want to echo the comment of my colleagues with regard to Dr. Rowe's departure, and note that the American Legion has awarded the Distinguished Public Service Award to Dr. Rowe, a well-deserved award, and we thank him again for his service and wish him well in the future endeavors. As the nation's largest wartime VSO, the Legion is a leading voice safeguarding veterans' hard-earned benefits and entitlements from erosion. We were founded back in 1919 to ensure that veterans who served their country and fought this nation's wars would be taken care of, especially those who were wounded or ill as a result of their service. And we've continually fought to make sure Congress appropriates the necessary funds for VA to operate and take care of veterans properly, as it is obliged to do. We are dedicated to ensuring veterans get the VA healthcare system they deserve and that it is optimally designed to meet their needs. You have my written testimony, so the time I have, I'll just touch on a few points. Let me say up front that the Legion strongly supports the formation of an advisory commission to evaluate VA's eligibility system and sees it as an excellent opportunity to bring responsible change to how VA determines eligibility. Congress can and should exercise immediate action involving reforms to VA healthcare and eligibility when possible. But setting up a multi-member bipartisan independent structure that incorporates participation from across the veteran stakeholder community would be welcomed in this instance. Throughout American history, Congress has found commissions to be useful in the listening process. By establishing a commission, Congress can provide a highly visible forum for critical issues and assemble greater expertise that may be readily available within the legislature. The complex policy issues involved here can be examined over a longer period and in greater depth. In addition, the bipartisan character of the proposed commission would serve to minimize the politics of the issue, which has become charged in recent years. Finally, the changing healthcare landscape has been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and consideration of its impact meaningful for the Veterans Health Administration is needed. Therefore, we concur with the Commission on Care's recommendation in their 2016 final report that an expert panel be convened to examine eligibility and recommend changes. We would welcome the opportunity to work with and on it. Now, the American Legion has multiple resolutions addressing possible veterans healthcare eligibility reforms, and it's long advocated for improvements based on them. In the aggregate, our resolutions express that VA's current access standards are not inclusive enough for this nation's diverse veteran population and have barred critical access to VA healthcare to many deserving veterans. Let me touch on two examples here. First, the American Legion stands behind providing access to VA healthcare to veterans regardless of their economic status. Over the past decade, the VA has shifted on whether to enroll veterans in Priority Group 8. In 2003, then VA Secretary Anthony Principi disallowed VA enrolling any additional Priority Group 8 eligible veterans. In 2009, then VA Secretary Shinseki proposed reopening VA healthcare enrollment to veterans without a service-connected condition in his priority group. Congress directed the VA to reopen enrollment to some veterans, but only in certain circumstances. The American Legion supports conducting a feasibility study to determine the impact and cost of reinstating the enrollment of more of these veterans. This decision could result in the gain of millions of dollars that could be used to support the delivery of healthcare to our nation's veterans. Second, the American Legion has a resolution calling for legislation that would ensure all World War II veterans are eligible for VA healthcare. However, due to current limitations in the law, some are prevented from receiving this benefit. Those who made the greatest generation great are nearly gone. We can recognize these remaining heroes with actions far more meaningful than words. Prior Congress exempted all veterans of the Mexican border period and World War I from the means test. It's time to do the same for these veterans and further open the VA rate system to all of our nation's remaining World War II veterans. Senator Bob Menendez and Kevin Kramer have already introduced bipartisan legislation in the Senate, which the Legion supports. The World War II Veterans Hospital and Medical Eligibility Act. However, there is no companion bill in this chamber, so we call on a member of this committee to champion the measure in the House. In conclusion, with veterans languishing behind access barriers to critical health care, it is incumbent on Congress and the veterans community to collaboratively evaluate the present eligibility system to ensure it properly supports the current needs of today's multi-generational veterans population. After all, one of the Legion's purposes is to preserve and improve the VA healthcare system to ensure veterans get the care they have rightfully earned. The American Legion will continue to work to revitalize the system that not only serves veterans population, but also has other critical roles. It is truly a national asset and one that should not only be reformed, but preserved. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I am prepared to take any questions you or the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele, for your testimony. I want to ask if Mr. Butler is able to, if the technical issues have cleared up. Mr. Butler, can you hear me?
I can.
Mr. Butler, I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes to give your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee. Paralyzed Veterans of America would like to thank you for the opportunity to submit our views on the need to modernize veterans' eligibility for health care through the Department of Veterans Affairs. We believe that the current process for determining VA healthcare eligibility remains valid. However, if the committee decides to move forward with a reassessment of eligibility, we believe that the committee should once again work with stakeholders to revise the system. Access to VA healthcare is critically important for PVA members who are all veterans with spinal cord injuries or disorders. We want to ensure that the VA healthcare system remains strong and able to fully serve these veterans in the coming years. 24 years have passed since the Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Reform Act of 1996 was passed. This law transformed the VA healthcare system from a 1950s hospital-based model to today's comprehensive one. Today's system requires most veterans to be enrolled as a condition of eligibility, and each one is assigned a specific enrollment category. Once enrolled, veterans are eligible to receive a generous medical benefit package as long as VA receives sufficient funding. On October the 18th, 1998, VA published its enrollment regulations allowing veterans who are not subject to the enrollment requirements and enrolled veterans access to VA health care. Since then, VA has only made 2 changes to who can be enrolled. On January 23rd, 2003, when VA published an final rule that discontinued enrollment of any new Priority Group 8 veterans who are not in an enrollment status on January 17, 2003, and on May 15, 2009, VA published another final rule allowing Priority Group 8 veterans whose income exceeded current means test threshold by 10% or less to enroll in VA's healthcare system beginning June 15, 2009. Unfortunately, VA's current management of the eligibility process leaves Congress, VSOs, and other stakeholders with no way of knowing whether VA's annual appropriation is sufficient to treat all veterans who want to enroll. We included recommendations in our written testimony on how VA can address this. Another change impacting eligibility for care was the passage of the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act of 2014, which further funded expanded access to community care to alleviate wait times, directed a comprehensive independent assessment of the VA healthcare delivery and management system, and established the Commission on Care, which recommended a separate panel look at the current system and develop recommendations for VA healthcare eligibility. However, there are 4 fundamental questions that must be addressed before Congress takes any action to establish another commission. How many veterans can enroll in the VA healthcare system? Are there limitations on access that are not addressed by VA's current priority groups that should be addressed? Are there any limitations that prevent VA from expanding enrollment to new Priority Group 8 veterans? And what additional first and third party revenue would Priority Group 8 veterans generate if all of them were allowed access to VA healthcare? We believe that Congress, VSOs, the healthcare community, and other stakeholders are best positioned to recommend any changes needed to improve access to VA healthcare. The 1996 eligibility reform process is a good example of how that process should work. As the 116th Congress draws to a close, I want to extend a special thank you to Dr. Rowe for your service in Congress and in particular your work with this committee. Thanks to you, to your leadership, key legislation like the Mission Act, Forever GI Bill, and more recently, the Specially Adapted Housing Improvement Act are a reality. Thousands of veterans have already benefited from efforts like these, as will many more in the future. PVA wishes you the best in your future endeavors. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Rowe, and members of the committee, PVA appreciates this opportunity to express our views on veterans' ability to enroll in the VA healthcare system. Access to the VA spinal cord injury system of care is crucial to their well-being, and we believe today's hearing can be the beginning of a process to improve access to care and ensure that those veterans who are already eligible for care are able to continue to receive the care they need and have earned. I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele, for your testimony. I will, oh, Mr. Butler, Mr. Butler. Excuse me for that. Thank you, Mr. Butler, for your testimony on behalf of PVA. I will now, I believe we have all the testimony from all of our witnesses. I will now move to member questioning. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. And I will begin my questioning with Mr. Panangala. Let me say thank you very much for your incredibly thorough history of VHA eligibility. And while I have been on this committee for a number of years now, I didn't fully appreciate its complex history until now. I understand from my staff that you have been with CRS since 2001. Now, given your great wealth of knowledge on the topic, what are the most important considerations we should think about as we embark on this discussion today?
Thank you, Chairman Takano, for that question. First, I would say VA healthcare is not a health insurance system in its traditional sense. The reason I say this is because it is both a payer and a provider of healthcare. So the cost containment mechanisms that traditionally are found in the VA healthcare system, in the traditional health insurance system, is like deductibles and co-insurance are not present in the VA system. Second, VA healthcare cannot be seen in a vacuum because, like the Commission Independent Assessment said, VA healthcare system and its veterans can obtain healthcare through multiple sources and alternative insurance coverage. So like Medicare, Medicaid, employer-sponsored insurance, all that plays a role here. And so any additional changes in the economy, say for example, unemployment, all influences the choices veterans make in choosing the VA healthcare system. So it is important for the committees to understand these interconnections between other healthcare sources that veterans obtain. And lastly, I would point out, as pointed out by the independent assessment some years back, that it will be useful to get an ongoing understanding of all the sources of healthcare that the individual veteran uses. So for example, where are they getting services? What services are they, what are the diagnoses they're receiving? Who is paying for that service? And this needs an ongoing understanding so that we can then figure out who can be eligible, what sources are the sources of healthcare revenue that VA can get. And so I understand, in the next panel that there are policy planning staff that could speak to this a little more. But my thing is that there is currently not enough data, as pointed out by the independent assessment, to fully understand the interconnection between veterans and other sources of healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you for that. For the VFW and DAV and PVA witnesses, Ranking Member Rowe's bill, H.R. 7469, seeks to establish an advisory commission regarding eligibility for health care. While reviewing the testimony of our VSO witnesses, I noted that all 4 have voiced strong oppositions to this piece of legislation. Are there any of you concerned that the Commission on Eligibility established under this bill would not convene until a year after enactment? This would be after much of the work has already been completed for the market assessments and Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission mandated by the Mission Act. So if you could respond to that, VFW, DAV, and PVA.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. The timeline of establishing this proposed commission is more important that the market assessment and the air commission that we did support is fully completed and assessed before we think the next commission is established. We don't want to see two commissions running concurrently when I don't think I'm understanding the importance of the air commission and the information that along with the market assessments is going to provide. I think that needs to be digested fully before we move on to the next step. Whether this proposed commission happens 6 months or 12 months or 18, whatever it might be, isn't our biggest concern, but it's more that the air commission is given the opportunity to be fully investigated first.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Next, maybe quickly from DAV.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question, and I concur with Mr. Murray in some parts, but that the nomination and moving forward with this particular commission or the Air Commission needs to be taken care of first. But we understand that those seats can't be done or can't be fulfilled until can't even meet until 2022. So we need to take care of business with the Air Commission first before we move forward with trying to seat or consider another commission running concurrently with the Air Act Commission.
Well, thank you. I see that I'm out of time, and I wish I could give PVA more time, but we have a long hearing today, and I want to make sure we stay on course. I'm going to call on Dr. Rowe to go ahead and ask his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me just address a couple of things, concerns. Look, the eligibility part and the market assessment and the Air Commission all are the same. You've got to know how many veterans you need to serve to know what the infrastructure is that you have both in the community and at the VA if you can serve those folks. The second question I asked myself and was when we looked at these priority groups, I remember this, and Mr. Chairman, I think you probably were there when we found out this. I found out just looking through this, I hadn't really studied it in depth as probably you hadn't either, that a Medal of Honor winner was a priority 3. We changed that and made them, this Congress did, made them a priority 1. If you're a Medal of Honor winner, you ought to have the president on speed dial, in my opinion. That should be no question. And the question is why there are 8 different categories, why aren't there 4, or why aren't there 1? Maybe the question should be, if you are honorably discharged, you should be eligible for VA care. That's one of the things, and I think any organization after 25 years would reevaluate their processes to find out, are they working? And I can promise you, I hear it all the time at home. Doc, how come I can't go to the VA? I hear it all the time, and I don't have an answer for them. So that's what I think this commission could help us do, is to clear that up and simplify it. And just a couple of questions. Mr. Steele, first I'll start with you, and I'll be remiss if I don't get a chance to say this to all the VSOs. You all have been fantastic to work with. I appreciate your kind comments, but most of this legislation would not have happened without your input, so I really appreciate that. And Mr. Steele, I want to thank you for the American Legion support of H.R. 7469. Can you elaborate on why the American Legion believes that the bill is both necessary and appropriate to better serve America's veterans?
Thank you for that question, Chairman. As you noted in your remarks, the healthcare system in the United States has changed immensely since the 90s. We have been through 2 decades of war, which has resulted in a veterans population, a new veterans population that has served multiple tours of duty and have had great impacts as a result of that have also impacted their family. We have a multi-generational veteran population going back World War II, Korean War, Vietnam veterans, along with the present generation. We've had the passage of Obamacare and the Mission Act, and Congress has, as you noted, has not considered this question for over 2 decades. The system is probably sound, but it I think it would be helpful for the committee to set up the commission in order to bring in outside expertise to verify that or modify that in light of the factors I mentioned earlier. Thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. I think this is obviously just the start of the conversation, but I very much appreciate you having this because I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. Mr. Butler, you laid out 4 questions in your written testimony that PVA believes are essential to today's questions, and I'm going to work on getting you answers to all of those. However, I would like to hear VA's response to the second question, which is, are there limitations on access that are not addressed by VA's current priority groups that should be addressed? And does PVA believe that the current eligibility system appropriately needs to meet needs of all of today's veterans? Why or why not?
Thank you, Ranking Member Rowe, for the question. I believe that VA the Secretary has the authority to expand enrollment and allow all eligible veterans access to VA health care. The only limitation to doing that is whether or not they have the annual appropriations to meet the needs of veterans enrolling into the system. So if the Secretary, the one thing that has been a disservice to Congress, the VSOs and others, is that we haven't seen any analytical data to demonstrate whether the appropriations being proposed by VA is adequate or sufficient to meet the needs of all veterans. So that's fundamental. VA should be doing that every year when they, before they submit their budget request. That way it gives Congress an opportunity to determine whether they're gonna fund it at the level to meet all enrolled veterans or not. And then VA would publish a rulemaking based upon how many veterans the annual appropriation would allow them to treat.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just say one thing before I yield back, is that this Congress, since I've been here, the VA budget, I think, was about $97.5 billion in my first term, and the President's request is north of $240 billion, plus the Congress has provided another $19 billion in the CARES package for the COVID. So I think Congress has done a great job in supporting the VA with limitations that we've had, and certainly I know this particular, the 116th, has. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe, for your questions. I would now like to recognize Ms. Brownlee for 5 minutes for her questions. Ms. Brownlee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, I would like to add my voice to say what an honor it's been to serve with Dr. Rowe. He's been a member of the committee since I've been a member of the committee, and I really have enjoyed working with him, and I will certainly miss his voice when it comes to advocacy of our women veterans particularly. He has always stood up for women veterans and their needs, even including changing the logo within the VA. And so thank you, Dr. Rowe, for your service to our country, for your service to this committee. And we will sorely miss you, but wish you the very, very best of luck in your future endeavors. So I think my first question really is to the VSOs in general. I think that most of you, anyway, have said that you don't think a commission is advisable for the moment, that the timing is wrong or it's just not advisable at this particular point in time. It sounds to me, barring the fact of more resources to provide healthcare to all of our veterans who need it. It sounds to me as though you're saying, and I want to hear a confirmation or not, that you think the existing structure, sort of the bones of the eligibility structure, is okay. We just need to continue to look at expansion of services like, burn pits and toxic exposure that we've talked a lot about in the committee. So is that a fair assessment? I know the American Legion is very much in support of this piece of legislation, but from the other VSOs, is that an accurate description?
This is Roscoe from PVA. Correct. Your assessment is on point. The current structure of the system, the priority groups, allows all veterans access to a generous medical benefit package. As the only caveat is that it's based upon the annual appropriations. So if Congress appropriates the money sufficiently to provide access and care to all enrolled veterans can get care.
Any other PSOs that want to chime in?
Congresswoman Brownlee, thank you for the opportunity to talk about that. We do think that there can always be changes made. Recently, we just did regarding mental health in terms of the priority groups. We think that maybe that could be reassessed. We think that there's always opportunity to improve the entire system. We don't think it's broken, however. So these are things that we just really want to focus on. We're always in favor of making minor changes where necessary. But a large overhaul with a commission that doesn't have a specific defined purpose is something we're a little concerned with.
Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Panagala, I think I'm not pronouncing your name very well, and so I apologize to you. I guess, this is a question that, I don't know whether you can answer or not, but I'm just curious from your perspective in terms of your knowledge of the VA system in general, the VA healthcare system, and specifically around the eligibility process. Do you think that there are changes that can be made? And I certainly agree with Dr. Rowe's premise of simplification, that's important. But do you think that there could be any, changes without, sort of fundamentally doing a complete overhaul of the process? And I see I have very little time, so maybe it's a discussion that we could have at a later date. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. I appreciate your attentiveness to the time. I now call on Mr. Belarakis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. And I also want to commend Dr. Rowe for his great service to our country. First, as an active service member again, but also continuing his service and making veterans his top priority. About the only thing that we disagree upon, Dr. Rowe, is that, it's great to be a Florida Gator. I know you guys are playing us this weekend, but even there, even with that, Steve Spurrier, the greatest.
You know how to hurt a guy.
Is from Johnson City. So anyway, thank you for your service, sir. It's been an honor to work with you. This is a question for the VSOs. I want to talk about my bill, the TEAM Act, which opens up Healthcare Priority Group 6 eligibility to veterans who have been exposed to toxic burn pits during their deployment. In this broader policy discussion about veterans' eligibility for healthcare at large, can you all talk about the implications for opening up this group of veterans to this priority level and what that might mean for the future as we work through toxic exposure and other veterans' healthcare issues. If whoever would like to go first, again, with regard to including those who have been exposed to the toxic burn pits. That's something that we've addressed, but we've got a lot of work to do on that. I'd like to get the opinion of the VSOs.
Representative Bilirakis, this is Roscoe Butler again. Your proposal is consistent with the way toxic exposures should work. Any veteran who currently is eligible or was exposed to a toxic substance are enrolled into priority category 6 and have access to VA healthcare on that basis. So it's no different than any other toxic exposure eligibility. So that's how it should work.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else, please?
Mr. Bilirakis, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the TEAM Act. We definitely support the initiative to add Category 6 healthcare for exposed veterans. It aligns with the VFW's priorities to three-pronged to take care of veterans in the past, current veterans, and set up a system for the future. So the TEAM Act is something that we're still working with your staffs to, we think, a couple minor edits, but we think it's going in the right direction. We're very supportive of the entire effort.
Yeah, we've got to get this done as soon as possible because these veterans need the care. So I appreciate that very much. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on the TEAM Act? By the way, we do have Senator Tillis who has sponsored the bill. So this is the House campaign.
Yes, Mr. Bilirakis, this is Mr. Bearfield with DAV. I concur with the statements that were made by Mr. Murray and Mr. Butler that being able to provide health care to those exposed to toxic exposures and burn pit is of the utmost urgency because of the fact that they are suffering from bad health and disabilities right now that unfortunately cannot be service connected right now. But the healthcare is something that can be established and should be established as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much time is left.
We say American Legion concurs.
Yes, please.
American Legion concurs with our colleagues.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Look forward to working with you on this. I'm not sure how much time I have left, Mr. Chairman.
You have about 50
But I
seconds.
do-
50 seconds.
seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Quickly, Mr. Penangala, can you speak to the role that the independent commissions, like the one in HR 7469 would create, have played, the role that they have played in the past, these independent commissions throughout history in designing the system of care and benefits that are offered to our heroes?
Thank you, Representative Bilirakis. Generally speaking, I would say commissions, the way they are structured, our task forces could examine complex policy issues for a longer period of time in greater depth than what is practical for members of Congress and their staff to do within a short period of time. However, any sort of policy decision or policy choices would rest on Congress, and I would go back and look at how Congress approached this back in 1996. So prior to the eligibility reform legislation, Congress began a series of discussions going back to 1992 and then engaged in considerable debate and deliberation for various legislative proposals prior to the legislative enactment in 96. And even then, the long-term care portion came later on in the Millennium Healthcare or the Mill Bill, which was pushed back until 1999. So I think there is precedent in the past to take some of the issues, but in the end, Congress would have to deliberate and understand what those policy choices and come to an agreement on it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, here's to you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Rowe. And I will, the media has described you as a powerhouse legislator and an even better person as far as I'm concerned. God bless you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Do you have ouzo in that coffee cup? All right. Mr. Lamb, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
What did you say?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join everybody in thanking Dr. Rowe for his many years of service on this committee, and in particular for being very hospitable and kind to me when I showed up in 2018. So we'll miss you, sir. I think I am on the side of those pointing out in their testimony that the basic task of defining eligibility and making sure that it suits the modern circumstances is one that is our job. I mean, to me, that's just basic legislating and something that we can do. So my question is a pretty fundamental one for the representatives of the VSOs that are in front of us today, which is if you could just each, and maybe we'll start with Mr. Steele and then go on from there, if you could just each clarify for me the main thing that you hear from your own members in meetings and conversations that you have. Is it an eligibility concern or an enrollment concern? I know what I hear a lot more are to enroll in the VA, but maybe I'm wrong. Is it eligibility or enrollment? And if it's eligibility, what is the highest priority category you hear that should be eligible for care and should not? Go ahead, Mr. Steele.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. The burn pit question refers to the eligibility. As Dr. Rowe noted, many of the questions that the committee has considered this year is regarding eligibility. So it is incumbent on the committee to always be mindful of those eligibility questions. But with regard to the priority group 8 and non-service connected veterans, then you're talking about enrollment questions. Regarding my colleague Ross Butler and appropriations and the VA not being forthcoming with enrollment data, then you're talking about enrollment questions. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Bearfield.
Yes, it's the same thing that Mr. Steele just mentioned. It comes down to, the eligibility, 1996, the reform in eligibility made VA available for everyone. So the hamper to the system is the enrollment process, and where, all are welcome to come, but all won't be welcome to get in. So if we can cross that hurdle and fix that portion of it, then the question that we were just talking about as far as burn pits and toxic exposures, that would open the door for those veterans to be able to receive health care without question. So the eligibility piece, I think, is taken care of. It's the matter of the enrollment system and making sure that all that are eligible can be enrolled to receive health care.
And I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a category of your members who you hear from most often that have trouble with the enrollment side? Is that what you're saying, is the toxic exposure is kind of the most common case study that you're hearing?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Is that the same for you, Mr. Butler? I know you've addressed this a couple of times.
For PVA, it's enrollment, because certain veterans, based upon their annual household income, and VA is no longer accepting new priority category 8 veterans. So they're not allowed access into the system. Eligibility under Title 38 USC 1710 drives enrollment. So enrollment is based upon the eligibility criteria. And so, the fundamental issue for us is that all veterans, honorably eligible veterans, aren't eligible to enroll in the system based upon the 2003 rulemaking VA published. And the last time they changed that was in 2009. And so we think that they need to really look back at that. And they're not asking Congress for the right amount of money to ensure all enrolled veterans can get access to care.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, what we went through in the past year, particularly with those 3 or 4 Agent Orange conditions that we've all been trying to get on the presumptive list was clearly a budgetary and appropriations issue held up at OMB. So part of this is about the science of these underlying conditions, but part of it is, you're correct, about just requesting the right amount of money, which I don't think a commission can help us with. That's something we have to fight for ourselves. So I think, Mr. Murray, we have a brief moment of time for you if you wanted to weigh in, but I think they're hitting the same themes. Go ahead.
I could quickly answer that, sir. Eligibility and enrollment do work off each other, but enrollment right now, one of the biggest things we are seeing is the question about income with previous year's income. That doesn't reflect your current situation if you are unemployed. That is a minor change that will help a major improvement.
Yeah, thank you for it, because that was going to be my parting thought, was whether there was anything kind of unique to this COVID time period that would make us need to look back at eligibility enrollment, because you're right, people are losing their jobs rapidly and often with it their health care in a time when we should just not tolerate a single person not having health care. So if anybody has any specific follow-ups on that they want to send afterward that you think we could address early next year as part of whatever big COVID package we end up doing, if that's the time that we do it, I would certainly be happy to hear that and work with you on it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I now recognize Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes. Ms. Radewagen, you appear to be on mute.
Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Rowe, for holding this hearing today. I too want to add my gratitude to Dr. Rowe for not only for your outstanding service, your leadership, and you've been like a mentor to me. And I sincerely wish you all the very best. Thank you to the panel for your testimony as well. Mr. Kanangala, your testimony describes in detail a long history of changes that have taken place on a regular basis concerning veterans' eligibility for care from the United States government since the Revolutionary War. Would you characterize those changes as becoming more or less restrictive over time? In other words, is it reasonable to expect that H.R. 7469, if enacted, would result in increased eligibility for care for veterans based on historical experience? Why or why not?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. While CRS doesn't take any specific position on any legislative proposals, I think it would be reasonable to characterize that eligibility laws over time have been generally liberalizing in nature. However, Congress has been sort of cognizant to the fact that, yes, there is a limited number of resources that can go, and not all veterans can be eligible to receive care, all those who may seek. Therefore, continuously, in this debate, service connection versus non-service connection, and those with incomes above a certain threshold and below a certain threshold, has continued to be factors of that long-standing debate of eligibility.
And Mr. Panangala, can you briefly describe the major changes that have taken place in the VA healthcare system and within VA patient population since the current enrollment priority group system was created back in 1996?
Yes, so the population, though the veteran population has been, overall population has been declining over time, it's projected to decline into the future years, the increase in demand for services has increased. So if you look at the enrollee population from 1999, the first year of enrollment, it was 3.2 million veterans, and currently it is closer to 3.2 million veteran patients to 6.3 million today. And then, and also the unique nature of wars have also increased the survivability of veterans. And so therefore, new programs have been enacted to provide services for them, like the family caregiver program. And then also the unique, the growth of women veterans with their unique needs have also been taking place during this period of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Levin, I recognize you for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleagues, I obviously have enjoyed serving with Dr. Rowe and wish him all the best. I'm grateful for his bipartisan work with us. Mr. Bearfield, in your testimony, you alluded to efforts by some to limit VA healthcare eligibility to combat veterans only. And the way I see it, this really assumes that only those engaged in combat are real veterans. And I just don't think that's right. You know, in truth, there are many dangerous, psychologically demanding assignments in the military that don't involve direct combat. And according to VA, most veterans, in fact, have not served in combat. Bottom line is, I think the veterans have earned and deserved access to care regardless of what duty they perform. So for the record, could you elaborate on why Congress should fully fund VA healthcare to meet demand rather than restrict access in order to fit budget goals?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Levin. I think when it comes down to my testimony, I don't think it was just limited to just combat veterans. We want all veterans that are eligible to be able to gain access to VA healthcare. So we're not limited to it. Our organization notes that, you know, service disabled veterans, yes, should have preference, but, you know, are up front. But all veterans, despite whether they were in combat or not, should have the ability to access VA healthcare. So I just want to make sure that that point is understood. It's just not combat veterans that we're talking about. We want VA healthcare to be available for all veterans that will be eligible and can be enrolled in the system.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. Another question for you. I was glad that the House passed HR 2398 earlier this year to expand HUD-VASH to veterans with other than honorable discharges. And I think we need to take another look at their eligibility for health care also. And, you know, to be clear, these are not dishonorable or bad conduct discharges. Many are suffering from mental health conditions, substance use disorders that have contributed to their discharge. And I think that indicates they need more support, not less support. Mr. Bearfield, you proposed that VA more liberally review OTH discharges when it makes character of discharge determinations. Can you provide more detail on what specific procedures VA could change in this regard?
Just like you mentioned, when it comes down to the circumstances of why these individuals were discharged, traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, as you indicated, substance use disorder, there are various reasons why some veterans have received those OTH discharges. So yes, there needs to be a revision or a way for those discharges to be examined where those veterans can be found eligible to receive care, the care that they really need. So that's what needs to happen, is a revision process should be made where those types of discharges can be reviewed, and depending upon the circumstances, those veterans can be found eligible to receive care.
Thank you for that. Mr. Murray, I wanted to turn it to you. As you mentioned in your testimony, many veterans have lost their jobs and thus their employer-provided health insurance due to COVID-19. We've all been keeping a close eye on the veteran unemployment rate, and we saw it was at peak around 11.8% in April. We're currently right around 6%, I think 5.9%. And, you know, look, it's going to be a challenge to get things back to where they were before the pandemic. We worked to accelerate that process with our Deliver Act, HR 7105. And in the meantime, we've got to ensure that veterans that have lost their insurance can access VA care. And I wholeheartedly agree with your recommendation that the VA process those applications as soon as possible. With the time we have left, how long is it currently taking for VA to process applications or priority group changes for your members in these situations?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll be honest with you, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. We're hearing anecdotal difference, and it all depends on the complexity of each case. Someone might go in for tinnitus and be, processed very quickly. They might have mental health, which would require follow-up screenings, which could take a little while, which will delay the process, the DBQ exam. So it does vary based on the complexity of each case. But I do want to stress that, the unemployment veteran issue right now seeking VA care is an example of changes that we would get behind and support. But just truly, a commission for overhaul is just a little bit too far. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Murray. And again, thanks to my colleagues and thank you, Dr. Rowe, for your many years of service to the committee. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. I now recognize General Bergman. 5 minutes, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to echo the words of all my colleagues, Dr. Rowe, there is no replacing you. It is only building upon your legacy of passion, visionary leadership, and commitment to accomplishment. I just can't thank you enough on behalf of everyone, especially the veterans who have benefited from your leadership. And on a slightly lighter note, I hope that you will let me know if you change your cell phone number for future reference when we have that need to talk about something that wasn't visible except maybe in your mind before the day you walked out the door. So thank you, sir. This is kind of a rhetorical question to start with. Have we ever known any bureaucracy who could reinvent, reprioritize, and provide better outcomes from truly an inside-out approach without occasional oversight and being looked at by other appropriate entities who could actually help it move forward? And I think as we look at the Department of Veterans Affairs, you've got so many great people who've worked there for a long time focusing on the veterans that we need to make sure that our role as Congress and here in the House enables bureaucracies to continue to evolve based upon everything from new needs to digital ways of doing business. That is our role as members of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Congress, and especially when it comes to oversight. So, Mr. Murray, in your testimony, you note that more data and direction is needed prior to forming an eligibility commission. Could you expand exactly upon what data is needed and whether you know if it is already being collected?
Thank you, General. I don't know if data is necessarily the right thing that we're truly looking for with the idea of this commission. It's more of direction. We think that just a commission on general eligibility is just a little too vague. If there was a commission to expand or contract or consolidate or with some kind of a goal with the commission is something that we think would help maybe set this up. Right now, it's just a little too vague in order for us to truly get behind it. That's the more information we're looking for with this.
Okay, I would ask you to take for the record for potential future input as to put yourself as the person who was going to define the eligibility criteria and purpose of a commission like that. So if we're going to scope something, we get it right in the eyes of the VSOs. as it relates to your direct relationship with your veterans communities, so that you know that what we're trying to achieve here and what the veterans expect and need are congruent. Again, Mr. Murray, we've talked a couple of different ways about the effect of the pandemic on unemployment and reemployment and this speeding up the process of reform. As we get veterans into the system and speed up that ability for them to get there now, could some of these new ways of doing things be applied to those veterans as they transition from their Department of Defense status to initially get them into the system? So in other words, to be part of a pillar and a bridge that's being built for these veterans in that transition from DOD to VA?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We believe that in the TAP process, during the out processing portion, that veterans be given the opportunity to opt into VA care right then and there. The VFW has BDD sites, we call it benefits delivery at discharge, at 26 locations around the country to do just that. So there's seamless transition from DOD healthcare to VA as quickly as possible.
Good. Thank you. And I see my time is up, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. And again, thank you, Dr. Rowe. Thank you.
Thank you, General Bergman. I now call on Ms. Luria for 5 minutes for her questions. Ms. Luria?
Well, thank you, Chairman Takano, and I wanted to also echo my colleagues and start out by thanking Mr. Rowe for his many years of service to our country, both in uniform and in Congress. And it's been a pleasure working with you. And thank you for all the work you've done on behalf of our veterans. I just wanted to start out with the last comment that was made by Mr. Murray. You just mentioned that there was a seamless transition for veterans from DOD to the VA, but I would argue that that's not entirely the case. There is no automatic enrollment for veterans when they transition from active duty to the VA. And under the current situation and with a lot of the things we've examined, especially things related to the critical crisis that we have in veteran suicide, for example, there's so many veterans out there who are not under the care of the VA. They're not even under the visibility of the VA as potentially needing or seeking care. So why would you describe this as a seamless transition if there is action required on the part of the veteran? Why would we not have this be an opt-out rather than an opt-in type scenario for veterans as they transition?
Ma'am, I would like to clarify what I was trying to describe was the VFW's BDD program at 26 military installations around the country, where we have veteran service officers who help those transitioning servicemen and women file their claim 90 days before leaving service, so that when they get out, they have that seamless transition. We want that at every base around the country. So I agree with you. It is not a seamless transition throughout, and that's not what I was trying to convey. What I was saying, that a program like that does set up those servicemen and women for success before they take off the uniform would help a seamless transition for healthcare all around at every base around the country.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And, I do agree that more programs like the ones you're describing, or an overall process that would ensure that when veterans do leave the service, they stay connected with the VA would be very beneficial. I wanted to go back to some data that I had seen in the testimony provided from CRS from Mr. Panangala. I apologize if I also have incorrectly pronounced your name. But the information says that 78% of veterans who've applied for service connection due to toxic exposures were denied since 2007. 78% of those veterans have been denied. And as I've listened through this hearing and the testimony from the different VSOs present here, what comes across, and if I were a veteran who had toxic exposure, say in Iraq or Afghanistan and somewhere in Southwest Asia, the message that be coming across to me watching this would be that the VA is doing just fine denying 78% of you. So I don't quite understand why everyone here is so content with the status quo, because I really do think that the VA is letting down our veterans, and especially in these areas of toxic exposure. So I'd like to start out with, Mr. Steele from the Legion, and then Mr. Bearfield. If you could just comment on the fact of how can you be satisfied with the status quo when we put this burden on the veterans to justify their exposure, and we're not getting them care when we know there are so many out there who critically need this care from the VA.
So was that question for me from CRS?
To Mr. Steele and Mr. Barfield. It looks like maybe Mr. Steele is unmuting, so we could respond. So, Mr. Steele, would you like to? Love to hear your response.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I believe we're still having some trouble hearing from Mr. Steele. So, Mr. Barfield, would love to hear your response on my question about how do we say that the VA is adequately serving veterans when 78% of those who had toxic exposure since 2007 have been denied.
Right, and thank you for the question, ma'am. With the numbers that are quoted, it's unfortunate that this has become an issue of entitlement to service connection, and that's what the hangup is the people or the veterans who have applied for benefits that have been denied. Because of that denial, they cannot receive the health care that they need. So this is the portion that our organization feels needs to be changed. They're applying for benefits or compensation benefits for the disabilities that they're claiming, but because they're not granted or found eligible, not found eligible, but not granted service connection for the disabilities that they're claiming as a result of their exposure, this is the hurdle that's keeping them from getting the health care. We feel that there should be a way to go around that hurdle. We understand that it's going to be difficult and it may take many more years of science to establish those presumptives, but the healthcare need is right now. So there should be a way for those veterans that have been exposed to burn pits and toxic exposure to be able to receive the healthcare that they need to address the disabilities that they're claiming. You're muted, ma'am. I can't hear you.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you completely that they should have access to that healthcare. And I think that, what we're discussing at this hearing is how we break down those barriers and how we take that burden off the veteran to fight for that healthcare and to make it available to them. And I believe that the bill we're discussing today that's presented by Mr. Rowe is looking for new and innovative and different ways to study and address those issues. But I'm very surprised that we're hearing so much resistance from the very VSOs who, day in and day out work to help the veterans. So it seems as though my time has expired, but wanted to thank you again for your participation.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. Mr. Musser, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I want to certainly thank our Republican leader, Dr. Rowe. Certainly, sir, been an honor to serve with you. And you, sir, are an example of a great member of Congress, and you will be very missed. So thank you. So Dr. Rowe has proposed a bipartisan commission to assess veterans' eligibility and make recommendations to Congress. Congress would receive recommendations, not directives. I can certainly understand, and it's very reasonable, why the Department of Veterans Affairs, for instance, would be concerned with a commission that talks about adding perhaps to the population of veteran beneficiaries, as well as added costs. They have to be concerned that they have to deliver on their promises and their budgetary constraints that need to be taken into consideration very, very carefully. The pay-for side of the ledger would be very much of a concern. Now, I also listened to the testimonies of the various panelists, and all of which I have great respect for, by the way. And the American Legion, as far as my information serves, is the only organization that is supportive of such a bipartisan commission. So I'd like to start with Mr. Steele. Could you maybe explain a little bit more detail why you would be favorable to this bipartisan commission?
Is Mr. Steele, can you hear? Yeah.
Not available?
Mr. Muser, why don't you go ahead and ask your next question while we try to get Mr. Steele back on?
Okay, Mr. Chairman. So I have to assume that the other organizations represented feel, as they stated, that they have effective access and can get things done in the manner that is suitable to the millions of veterans that you represent. Is Mr. Steele back? So I'll just move on, and Mr. Steele, if you are back, I'll come back to you. So perhaps I could hear from Mr. Butler on why you feel that the status quo is working just fine for the paralyzed veterans of America, or if you have a better suggestion.
Every veteran who applies for enrollment is eligible for VA's health care only if the appropriation is adequate to meet their needs. So it's not an issue of eligibility or enrollment. It's a matter of whether VA has adequate funding to meet the needs of all enrolled veterans.
Okay.
And I also want to make a point as it relates to toxic exposure. Congress gave VA the authority to provide health care to veterans, notwithstanding there's evidence to prove that they were exposed. So it's not, compensation is one thing, but for health care, the doctor has very liberal interpretation of whether the condition was related to an exposure or not. Also, want to make a clarification about unemployment. If a veteran is unemployed, they can file a financial hardship, and their eligibility will be based upon what they project that their current income will be over the next 12 months. And so if that projection demonstrates that their income is below the VA means test or GMT threshold, they're granted access to care. So there are things that Congress gave VA the latitude to consider when determining eligibility.
Sir, yes, I understand, and certainly our veterans have improved. I think many of us here understand that and agree with that, and they've been working towards that for quite a while. My time is about run out, but if, Mr. Chairman, if you just indulge, I'd leave with this question. Sir, thank you. My VA in my district, Lebanon VA, which does an excellent job, truly, for our veterans, suggested many veterans have a big concern in the eligibility in sub-priority 8G with gross household income above the VA and geographically adjusted limits. And looking at the limits here, they look like they should be adjusted. Now, I'm not sure precisely in preparation for this hearing what the calculation is for these income levels, but they look pretty low. So I'm just wondering if such a commission would help us get to these sort of findings and these sort of ideas and suggestions that perhaps would be beneficial for us to have a better understanding of and delve into and look to correct and improve. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Muser. Ms. Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I just want to extend my appreciation for Ranking Member Rowe for your commitment to our country and our veterans. It really has been an honor to serve alongside you on this committee. I just have a couple quick questions. For Mr. Butler, I just wanted to know from your vantage point, what, if any, impact might the ongoing expansion of the VA's community care network or the upcoming AIR Commission have on access to care for eligible veterans? And secondly, does the PVA have any concerns in this area that the committee should be made aware of?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Lee. The community care expansion provided VA with the access to a network of community care providers outside the VA. So when you look at inside the VA and you mirror that with the providers outside the VA, PVA believes that there is adequate provider resources to meet the needs of veterans who are enrolling into the VA healthcare system. The only barrier or limitation to enrollment and access to VA care is funding. And that's a very difficult issue and something to address. But given if everything was perfect, all veterans, eligible veterans who enroll would get access to care.
So my question is, does the PVA believe that the current eligibility system, do you believe it's a good system for determining eligibility for VA care?
We believe that, there was a lot of work that went into developing this. When I worked for the VA, I was the lead person for drafting the enrollment regulations. And there was a lot of thought that went into that. VA called upon testimonies from various organizations and so forth, which led to the 1996 enrollment statutory authority. Yes, we believe that it's a good system. Is it perfect? No. Can there be changes? Yes. But barring that, the system worked as Congress intended. If VA requested the funding and Congress provided the funding, it allows for enrollment of all veterans.
Great, thank you, Mr. Butler. Next, I have a question for Mr. Bearfield. Can you talk about why you think it's important to expand eligibility for health care for those veterans who were exposed to burn pits or other toxic substances?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Lee. Yes, the eligibility should be expanded for them because they have disabilities right now that are, in some cases, they're expiring from, they're passing away from. And they need to be able to get into the VA healthcare system to have those disabilities and conditions addressed and treated. The longer that this is drug out, the more that there will be persons expiring from those conditions. We understand that the component of trying to get them service-connected benefits on the compensation side of the house is going to take some time. But with the healthcare piece, we feel that that door should be open for them right away. The conditions that they're suffering from need to be addressed as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And then finally, is your opposition to the commission on eligibility primarily because you don't think eligibility needs to be reformed, or is it because you don't think the commission is the way to go about it?
Our position is that the commission is not the way to go about it. With the committee and Congress having the expertise and knowledge that they have right now, they should be able to resolve the situation as it is. But we are not opposed to them maybe considering bringing in some experts from the outside to kind of partner with them, with the committee and with Congress to resolve the issues that need to be discussed concerning eligibility.
Okay, thank you. And I'm finished. I yield.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Mr. Sablon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to associate myself with the many fine comments made in recognition of Dr. Rowe's service to the country and, of course, to his constituents and to Congress and this committee in particular. Dr. Rowe, please know that I certainly am going to miss you, sir. And Godspeed, Dr. Rowe, and thank you for everything you've done and all the mentoring and all the information that you have shared with me over the past 4 years that I've been on this committee on the waiver, both when you were chair and now where Mr. Takano is chair. Again, I will certainly miss you. Mr. Chairman, behind me is a photo of a group of veterans on Veterans Day, and standing in great pride for having served our country. Many of these veterans continue to miss or lack the service that the VA and our country has an obligation to provide for them. And I will continue to fight for that and get them the best service possible. I understand that it can be done, but it will continue to fight, and I appreciate your holding this hearing. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Sublime. Ms. Underwood, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding today's hearing, and to our panel of witnesses for joining us. Mr. Bearfield, as you know, many veterans who face burn pit exposure in Iraq and in Afghanistan are still young adults. How would updating VA eligibility according to the latest science on this kind of exposure improve health outcomes for these veterans?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Underwood. Yes, with the updated information from the science and research that has gone into, or that should go into this eligibility for veterans that have been exposed to toxic exposures and burn pits, I think that the science would help do two things. One, it would help speed up the process for them to be able to receive the health care that they need. And two, it would also support them being able to receive benefits on the compensation side as well. Once the science is there to prove and back up that the claims that these veterans are making about their exposure to burn pits is supportive of their cases, then on both fronts, benefits and healthcare should be awarded to them.
Right, but do you have any specific feedback about their health outcomes, either immediately or throughout their lives?
I don't have any information about that right now, but I can take that question for the record and get a response back for you in writing.
Fantastic, thank you. Right now, women make up the fastest growing segment of the veteran population, and they have unique needs that the VA must be prepared to serve. To the panel, can you all expand on how the eligibility issues that we're discussing affect the health and general well-being of women veterans specifically? Mr. Bearfield, you're on the screen for me right now, so if you want to start, and then we'll turn to the others. Thank you.
Yes. We understand that women veterans are a growing population and that they do have a set of unique needs. And along with the expansion of the care that they need, eligibility for them and being able to meet their unique situations is paramount to be able to address the concerns that they have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else would like to chime in on this question about women veterans? Sorry, I can't really tell the way the screen is laid out. Is Mr. Butler a witness here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So Congress has provided a lot of changes for women veterans, IVF, maternity benefits, And so as long as a woman is enrolled in the VA system, they have access to a standard of benefits to meet their specific gender-specific needs. So the eligibility, though, is still the same for a male or female. They have to meet the eligibility criteria, and then once they meet that eligibility criteria, they're enrolled on the basis in a priority group that they fall within. But once they're enrolled, they have access to a full access of women gender-specific care to meet their needs.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Mr. Panagala?
So I would approach this in a different way. So we have the benefits package, but we also have eligibility. So the way it works is Congress has changed the benefits, even though eligibility has remained sort of constant. So for example, newborn care was a new added benefit for women veterans. Community care generally tends to do a lot of services outside of the walls of the VA, just because the VA for many years didn't have the expertise and capacity to treat women veterans. So when, like Mr. Butler said, the eligibility is generally the demand for services tend to be driven by the fact that if the benefits become better, then veterans choose more to come into the system, or choose the VA because it offers them a better service and a better benefits package compared to other services or other services they may not have elsewhere. Right. So that has a demand factor on the system, which is where that tension lies between the resources.
Well, I'd like to thank these witnesses. Obviously, my two questions were about healthcare outcomes. And I do think that eligibility decisions, meaning who is eligible for care, can yield significant outcome changes and for young people and throughout their lifetimes, and then also for women veterans, young veterans, I mean. And we see this in the general population, right? Access to care improves health outcomes. Would love if you all could take it on and share with the committee your findings and your research and your data about the outcomes for our veterans populations. Thank you all so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Underwood. I believe that concludes the questioning on the first panel. I'd like to declare a 5-minute break before we call the second panel before us. So a 5-minute recess. You think so?
Is everybody here, or are they just in their offices, or where are they?
Some are in their offices, and some are like Sublime.
Some are traveling. I know.
Yeah.
I know a lot of them are probably in the air because we don't vote till tonight, so many of them are probably just flying in today.
Yep. Yep.
Appropriately sterilized. Have you ever had to go into the doctor's lounge and come out of the OR and they always got somebody sitting there on the counter in the doctor's lounge? Yeah. Those were the good old days. Those were the good old days. Now you go to jail over that. You know, that's when I started to play golf, all serious. Because when I was in the medical equipment business,
Mr. Chairman, are you ready to begin?
Yes, Madam Clerk, I am ready.
Please provide a 5-second countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now I will introduce the witnesses we have on our second panel. I have called the recess to an end. We have Ms. Tammy Zarnecki, Deputy to the Assistant Undersecretary for Health for Operations, the VHA. Mr. Garth Miller, Director, Member Services, Veterans Health Administration. Valerie Madison Brown, Chief Strategy Officer, Veterans Health Administration. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. I got to get to panel 2 questions. Here we are.
They need to do their opening statement.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Ranking Member Rowe, for reminding me what a chairman does. We'll start first with our first witness, with Ms. Zarnecki. Ms. Zarnecki, you recognize. Go ahead.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Dr. Rowe, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting us here this morning to discuss veterans' eligibility to enroll in VA's healthcare system and present our views on 69, the Modernizing of Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Act. I will be very brief this morning and convey a few central points from our written testimony. Before I begin, I want to join many others this morning in thanking Ranking Member Rowe for his years of service and how much his dedication and thoughtfulness has meant to our veterans and to the country and to VA. He has been a great example of how Congress and the department can work together to make a difference for our veterans. As you all know, eligibility for VA healthcare benefits is determined by Congress, and understanding eligibility criteria can be quite complex. We appreciate being able to listen to the first panel, who bring a great deal of insight, experience, and expertise to the discussion today. I will not step through all the legislative history since we have given a brief overview in our written testimony, and the Commission on Care and Congressional Research Service have done a great job of laying out the history in detail. However, the points I'd like to emphasize are that the modern age of VA healthcare eligibility began with the landmark Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Reform Act of 1996, which widened eligibility using a priority group structure and made healthcare available to eligible veterans more comprehensive and consistent. There have been numerous refinements along the way, including the addition of more limited benefits for those who would not otherwise be eligible for healthcare. These have been aimed at special circumstances Congress believed merited attention, such as conditions associated with military sexual trauma, those who have been exposed to toxic exposure while in theater or during their service, and consideration for the need of mental health for former service members with other than honorable discharge from the armed service. VA's invitation to today's hearing asks a very important question. How well does the current eligibility system serve the current generation of service members and veterans? We believe in response that the eligibility framework that Congress established for VA healthcare has served our veterans well, with the recognition that rules can sometimes be complex to apply and understand. Over 90% of our service-connected veterans are estimated to be enrolled, meaning that the vast majority of veterans with service-connected conditions have access to healthcare through the VA, including specialized VA healthcare such as our prosthetics program and our spinal cord injury services. Does that mean that the system cannot be improved? VA believes we always look for opportunities to improve our eligibility system, together with Congress and veteran advocates such as those who preceded us on the first panel. We look forward to the discussion today with the members of the committee to further the conversation. That said, any future changes in statutory eligibility criteria would of course be up to Congress to determine. That brings me to the legislation at the center of the hearing today, Modernizing Veterans Healthcare Eligibility Act. This bill would establish a 15-member commission to undertake any evaluation and assessment of the VA healthcare eligibility, and issue reports that includes recommendations for administrative and legislative action. Respectfully, we do not support H.R. 7469 as a mechanism to recommend policy in this area. As the esteemed as the members of the Commission might be, we believe more exchange among Congress, VA, and our veteran service organizations should occur first, and then the regular legislative process utilized before considering delegation of those discussions to a formal commission. We also believe there should be some fleshing out of the magnitude and the direction of potential changes for eligibility before considering standing up a formal body to recognize significant changes. Because VA healthcare eligibility is subject to Congress's budget process, we also believe appropriation committees would be a vital part of this discussion regarding comprehensive eligibility reform. This hearing provides us with a welcomed opportunity to hear some of the concepts the committee and veteran service organizations have in mind. We look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zarnecki. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to question panel 2. For the VA witnesses, on January 17th, 2019, VA notified Congress via letter that the 96 market assessments required as the first step in the broader asset and infrastructure realignment efforts, they would be completed by late 2020. Well, it's December 2020, and the committee has yet to receive copies. Do you have any update regarding when we might see the completed market assessments?
I'll ask Ms. Madison Brown to answer that question.
Ms. Brown, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. The date of December 2020, I'm not quite sure about that date, but our proposal was always to have the field work completed in the winter of 2021. So that's what we are targeting. And right now, we did have some delay as it related to COVID response, but we are still targeting to have the work completed and ready for the Air Commission in January 2022.
Yeah, I just note that it was on January 17th, 2019. That's when VA notified us, Congress, via letter, that the 96 market assessments required as the first step in the broader asset and infrastructure realignment efforts would be completed by late 2020. Ms. Zarnecki, the department's written testimony states that, quote, VA is open to discussing with the committee how the eligibility rules set by Congress can be improved, clarified, and streamlined. VA is also open to discussing ideas for more fundamental eligibility reform. However, we do not support H.R. 7469 as a mechanism to have that discussion. We believe more exchanges among Congress, VA, and veteran service organizations should occur first before outsourcing the policymaking process to a commission, as esteemed as the members of the commission may be. You go on to say that the appropriations committees should be included in discussions about eligibility reform. Would you care to elaborate on all this? Based on past experiences with commissions, why is this work best left to policymakers, the department, VSOs, rather than a commission in your estimation?
The eligibility system is extremely complex, as is enrollment. They are very different entities. And so we truly believe that we need subject matter expertise, and that the VSOs bring that level of subject matter expertise, as well as some of our VA healthcare providers, as well as much of this congressional panel. And so we're thinking that we would need to have that group determine what the scope of what kind of eligibility reform we were talking about. And if we were thinking to expand eligibility, we would need the appropriators as part of that discussion. So that was where we were, that was what our thinking was as far as not supporting 7469.
Thank you, Ms. Zarnecki. I believe VA's enrollee healthcare projection model projects that 329,000 new unique veterans will enroll in fiscal year 2021. However, it is also my understanding that the projection doesn't account for the impact of COVID-19 and long-term unemployment. Can the current model be modified, or is there any usable projection tool that can give VA and Congress an idea of the likely demand that will result from this pandemic in the coming year?
Ms. Madison Brown, can you address that?
Yes, so we are currently looking at the impact of COVID-19 on enrollment. We're doing that as part of our market assessment work. So we're still studying it, but we feel confident that we can adjust the model as we go forward based on those impacts. So we're still looking at that.
Okay, so you're looking to see how you can adjust for the reality of this pandemic.
Correct.
In terms of what will be the real impact on the VA healthcare system.
Correct, because I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was going to add that, you know, our model projects, and it doesn't take into account things that happen, such as, you know, COVID, the economy, and so we have an opportunity to go back and relook based on what's happened in the environment.
Yeah, I know Dr. Stone is very concerned about this.
Yes.
So and it's going to be important for us to know, you know, how much more funding we're going to need. He's actually given me some idea of, like, for every X number of, for X percentage of unemployment, how that translates into projected VA increases in VA demand. All right, I'm going to stop there. I recognize Dr. Rowe for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, what I'm hearing some today in the testimony is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, here's why all of this ties together. If you look at eligibility, and the VSOs made a great point, Mr. Butler certainly did, and that's why I think you need an objective look at this. Look, how many people you take care of obviously depends on how much funding you have. And all of this very complex priority is basically based on appropriations. We can only do this many, so we're going to cut this group out because we don't have the appropriations, and we add another group in. I think it's time, and Ms. Zarnicki, I want to just ask you this. In H.R. 7469 is based on the Commission on Care's recommendation in 2016 that an independent expert body be established to recommend how eligibility to enroll in the VA healthcare system could be improved. That recommendation was deemed feasible and advisable by then Secretary McDonnell and supported by then President Obama. Has VA and or the administration's position on that recommendation changed in the last 4 years? And if so, why? If not, why not?
We believe that the Commission on Care and 7469 are a little bit different. So the Commission on Care did recommend that a subject matter expert body be established to take a look at it, but it didn't specifically recommend that a congressionally appointed body do that. And so we're thinking that that for the Commission on Care's recommendation, that we would have a independent body of our VSOs and some of our congressional partners, frankly, that could really delve into that, into the detail, but have a generalized understanding of where we've been and how we've gotten to where we're at. What we see in 7469 is a
Well,
body
the question
that
I have is that why hadn't it been done? And it's exactly the reason that this committee established a technology subcommittee, because we needed somebody to focus on this very important issue. And this eligibility is one of the most important things I hear when I go home, but other than the quality of care they're getting. So what's happened is we've created these various category groups that then force a veteran who just really wants to get a physical exam at the VA. They're an honorably discharged veteran, but then they have to look and say, what can I do to get into one of these service groups to get care? So that's why I think we need to have an independent group, or if the committee next term wants to do something different as far as sitting down and focusing on this, it absolutely has to do that, because the market assessments, for instance, the capability there. And I don't think people understand that we're having a healthcare crisis in this country with access. We've had the COVID has prevented people from going to the doctor. We know that in 10 years, we're going to be over 100,000 physician providers short. We know that. So I think we need a comprehensive look at both the priority groups, what services the VA are going to provide. And I think, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Stone, or maybe it was the Secretary, said that the VA during the pandemic had hired 18,000 new employees. Many physicians and nurses have left the private sector and gone to the VA. So I think we do need to do this. If the Congress does it, I think that would be fine, but it needs to be focused on. It does need to be, and an independent group is certainly an easy way to do it. And you don't have to do what they say. You can take their recommendations, use parts of it, use all of it, use none of it. Any response? I don't understand why people are afraid of having their systems of value. That's all we're doing. I would welcome it if it were my practice, if it were my business. I would welcome that to see if I could improve what I'm doing. Maybe what you're doing is good, but couldn't it be better?
I think VA is a learning organization. We always think that there's opportunity for improvement. I don't think we're at least bit opposed to improving the system.
Well, I certainly would hope not. I'll yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brownlee, if I do see you there. Ms. Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Pause just a few seconds before you start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Rowe just said. That I think that is very critical that we get our arms wrapped around, what our eligibility is, and the market assessments and how we pay for it is critically important, and that my estimation should be completely transparent. I actually have carried a bill for the last couple of years that would require the GAO to review the adequacy of the administration's budget, based on the amount of veterans that we're serving and the kind of health care that they need, to get that perspective. But so I guess, Ms. Zarnecki, my question to you would be, as you do these market assessments, and I presume you make a recommendation to the administration in terms of what the budget should be for VA healthcare, is all of that transparent? Is it out there for Congress to review, for VSOs to review? Is that attainable information?
So are you talking about the budget piece of it or the market assessment piece?
Yeah, budget piece. Well, I mean, the market assessments are foundational to the budget process, I presume.
Yes, so I can speak to the panel here. We're not budget experts. However, we do follow the budgetary process. I'm going to ask Ms. Madison Brown to talk a little bit about how that will feed in. But our budget goes to OMB. It's fairly transparent on what we're requesting funding for. So, Ms. Madison Brown?
Certainly, thank you. In terms of the market assessments, we will be providing the market assessment recommendations through the Secretary in that January 2022 timeframe. Now, the process that we are using has been transparent, and we've been working with your committee staffers to update them periodically on what we're doing and how we're doing it. So once the Secretary makes the recommendations as it relates to capital and infrastructure that will go forward to the Air Commission, then that information, of course, will be available for you all.
Okay, so there is ultimately every year when you go through this process a document that shows what the market assessments are, what the needs are, and what the budget is, so that there is an ability for us to assess that the budget put out there meets all of the needs that we have assessed through the market assessment. Is that accurate? I don't recall seeing something like that in one of our committee hearings.
So just one point of clarification in terms of the market assessment work. This will be done every 4 years, so we won't submit something every year. But of course, the results of this current process will be incorporated in future budget requests.
Okay, so I hear that, but I think in the budget process every single year, there's got to be some kind of assessment for you to evaluate, what the needs are to ensure that you have a budget that is going to cover, cover the needs of our veterans based on the policies that we have.
And I will add one other thing. We do have our normal skip process that requests funding needs for future fiscal years. So that's always part of the budget process. So you would see that. And then any work related to the market assessments would help inform that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. I now call on Mr. Bergman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'll probably start with a rhetorical question for you all, like I did with the other VSO panel, and that is it reasonable to think that a bureaucracy can reinvent and reform and keep itself on the edge of good change without occasionally any outside perspective looking at it? And I'll just leave that at that. But Ms. Zarnecki, can you identify any delays or obstacles which may exist for veterans who try to complete the eligibility process in a timely manner? Any just things that just stick out there that just everybody goes, wow, that's in the way?
I'm going to actually turn that over to Mr. Miller. He's over Member Services that does the eligibility.
Thank you, General Bergman, and thank you for your service to our country as well. I thank you for that. We have actually internally taken on many reforms that have addressed pending applications that are incomplete. We do that in multi-fashion. One of them is through our outreach campaign for veterans who have incomplete, maybe they don't have their financial information available, or maybe they have incomplete service data available at the time of application. Instead of letting those sit, we actually proactively reach out to those veterans from our team. Another really good example is that veterans don't always want to come into a VA medical center to apply. So we've now made it completely online at va.gov, as well as for those veterans who are not as comfortable online or walking into a VA medical center. They can call our team at 877-222-VETS, and I'd like everybody to share that, please, with your constituents. 877-222-VETS, where our team will actually walk the veteran and their family members through the application over the phone.
Okay. Let me ask kind of an adjunct to that, because to become a veteran, you pretty much have to go through a minimum of 8 years of service to the Department of Defense. And then at that point, after roughly 69% of the men and women who sign that 8-year contract leave after one enlistment contract. 9% stay for 20 or more and walk out the door with a pension and health care. So we're basically talking about, roughly 70, some percent of the folks who would potentially come through your door. Is there historically any activity that you remember on the part of VA either reaching to DOD or DOD reaching to VA to try to figure out ways to build some of these bridges, especially in the, as we look at IT modernization and digital, but let's, as far back as you can look, do you have any points that say either stick out as good or not so good. I mean, a failed attempt is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means what you tried didn't work.
We have worked with DOD, and I'll have Mr. Miller elaborate on that.
Yes, General Bergman. So in addition to enhancing TAP, and we're always looking at the Transition Assistance Program and our partnership there, as far as getting a smoother transition right on the spot, we have Concierge for Care as well as Welcome to VA, which are both outbound calling campaigns to reach out to veterans and assist them with that. In addition, I would like to highlight the work of, that we don't have any VBA participants on the panel today, but their Solid Start program is something that I think would bear a lot of attention if you all haven't heard about it before. They really are becoming very active in making sure that that transition is very smooth for veterans.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Lamb, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses for joining us here today. I think my question has a little bit more to do with the year that's coming ahead and the way that COVID could be affecting our veteran population in the way that they're seeking care, how they're receiving their care. Are you seeing any evidence that when they could not get in for in-person care in parts of the country around this summer, did that deferral or delay of care affect them negatively? And I think this is all connected to what we're talking about in the hearing today, because you guys are emphasizing that this is, as much as anything, a budgetary and appropriations issue. So do we need to be looking at the budget and appropriations for 2021 for VA Health differently because of the added costs and toll of COVID? I guess that's my overall question.
I can certainly start to address that, and then Ms. Madison Brown has already commented on the fact that we are looking at adding in some projections through the modeling. COVID has definitely changed the way we deliver health care. Veterans that had routine face-to-face care didn't get all of their appointments just canceled. We transitioned their care to virtual care. So we've provided the care to them either through telephone care, video connect, telehealth. We provided care in a number of different ways. Veterans who needed care urgently or needed face-to-face care, even when we were locked down, was able to come into our medical centers and receive the care that they needed. It is definitely different, and our satisfaction with our veterans has actually held fairly consistent. Our trust scores with our veterans are close to 90%. Our veterans have understood what we're trying to do in the light of COVID. And so even though we weren't doing as much face-to-face care in March through June, we have transitioned. We put gating criteria in, and as medical centers met the gating criteria, they started reopening face-to-face care, and many of our medical centers are over 75% to 100% fully back open in their face-to-face care. But care was never delayed due to COVID. It was transitioned to a different mode.
Yeah, I think what I was referring to there was the anecdotal reports I've gotten from veterans themselves who just sort of voluntarily deferred or delayed because they don't like using the digital or telehealth options, which may be a subset. It may be an older group. So that wasn't meant as some kind of criticism. I just meant more, my question is, are you seeing a compounding effect of those decisions by veterans in maybe them needing more serious treatment or any of their conditions getting more serious now that could have budgetary implications for next year?
I think that we will see some of that. To be perfectly honest, you are correct. There were some veterans who, due to COVID, were frankly afraid to come into a medical center and let their condition maybe progress a little bit further than what we would ideally have liked. Time will have to tell, though, on what the budget impact of that will be.
Okay, Ms. Brown, did you have anything you wanted to add there, or?
I'm sorry, I didn't have anything in addition other than what we're planning to do with projections.
Okay, thank you both, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Mr. Muser, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Rowe. So there are many veterans in my district. First of all, thank you all for your service and appreciate you being here with us today. I have many veterans throughout my district that have a great concern with the eligibility of the sub-priority 8G with gross household incomes above the VA and geographically adjusted limits. And when you look through the numbers, it gets a little bit more concerning because I have counties that are adjacent to each other, across the river, literally, and the difference can be as much as $6,000 in adjusted gross income or in gross income, whether or not they're VA eligible. So is this something that you hear regularly as well? And is this something that's being reviewed?
I will ask Mr. Miller to please comment on eligibility with income.
Yes, and thank you, Representative Muser. If you don't mind, I'd like to put it in the context of this year with the COVID and some of the hardships that we've seen and we've heard referenced previously. So how we handle hardships, for example, unexpected unemployment, things such as that, would be that those are adjudicated locally at the local VA medical centers where those relationships and connections are most direct with the veterans versus a centralized repository. There are a couple of ways to do this. The 1010HS is the hardship form, and I don't want to bury you in forms, but there's also a 1010EZR that our income verification division in Atlanta can actually help with people who have a discrepancy between the IRS-supported data that's given with regard to income, or if they have maybe outstanding medical bills or adjustments that need to be made to that calculation, which you referenced, the geographically adjusted income limits, or the GALE.
Okay. I can get from you, I'm sure, how this is calculated, because I'm very curious. I would not guess at some of these numbers that I see from one county to the next. Because the income levels don't vary that much, but they do on the eligibility requirements and thresholds.
We can provide that information to you.
Okay. Does this get adjusted every year or every couple of years, or how is that done?
Mr. Miller, can you comment on that?
Yes, it's adjusted by geography using census data. It's a little more complex than I think probably what we could lay out here, but as Ms. Zarnecki indicated, I will take that for the record as a follow-up action, sir.
And is community care on the same eligibility income thresholds as VA center care?
Actually, I believe so. I believe that your eligibility determines what you're eligible for.
I was just
community
curious.
care.
I really would very much appreciate following up with you on this and understanding this better, and frankly, seeing what we could do to, in my view, at this moment, make it more fair for the geography that makes up my district. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Muser. Ms. Lee, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Lee, I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can. We can.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions for Ms. Zarnecki. As we're talking about the need to modernize eligibility, I wanted to focus on a specific group of veterans who were discharged on actual or perceived LGBTQ status. Since the 2011 Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was repealed, has the DOD or the VA identified how many service members received a bad discharge because of an actual or a perceived LGBTQ status?
I would have to take that for the record because I believe that would be on the VBA side to, that would have denied that. So can we take that for the record?
Yeah, that I'd appreciate that, and please follow up with my staff on that answer. Thank you. When this was repealed, the DoD put out a memo outlining rules that upgraded for upgrading these discharges. Since 2011, do you know what percentage of service members who were eligible for upgrades actually applied for one?
Again, I believe that is on our VBA side. We can take that for the record.
Okay, yeah, and then if you can just also follow up and provide data on those who actually applied, how many of them actually received an upgrade as well, that I'd appreciate that. And then my final question is, has the VA conducted any educational campaigns to inform this part of the veteran community about their eligibility for an upgrade?
I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to elaborate on this one.
Thank you, Representative Lee, for the opportunity to respond as well. I can speak to the outreach that we have done to other than honorable veterans since 2018 with regard to their potential eligibility for emergent mental health or behavioral health treatment. That was the focus of the mailings that we did, the multi-channel outreach campaign, including mailed letters, VA website, blog hits. We had over 2.6 million subscribers that received. I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am.
Excuse me, Mr. Miller. I know all about that campaign, the one that was specifically targeted towards mental health. The question I'm asking are for service members who were are in this category with respect to LGBTQ status. Was there any campaign done to inform them of their potential for an upgrade?
I think we'd have to take that for the record. The only thing I can speak to is the information that we desperately wanted to get out to those who were most likely to need immediate mental health or behavioral health care. We saw that as the top priority in 2018.
I understand. I just, I feel that this is, obviously, these are veterans who received a discharge and now are eligible. And I think that I'd appreciate if you can follow up with me. And if the VA has not done any type of educational campaign with respect to this class of veterans, I'd appreciate sort of an explanation for what the barriers are. And obviously, if there is a potential to do any type of campaign, I think it would be useful for these men and women who have served our country and may be eligible for expanded services. And with that, I yield. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Mr. Sablon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'd like to get the panel's comments on what they expect from a VA eligibility expansion plan already required under the Deaf Mental Health Care Improvement Act just enacted in October. So under Section 101 of this law, the VA must develop a strategic plan to give all veterans 1 year of health care after they separate from active service. Providing 1 year of health care after discharge would greatly help veterans and their families make a transition to civilian life. My bill, HR 5024, implements such an expansion and is supported by the VFW and American Legion. So VA must submit the strategic plan to Congress no later than 1 year after the bill's enactment. Can I get the VA's commitment that it will indeed provide this plan to this committee before next October?
I will certainly take that back for the record. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with, and it doesn't look like my panel's familiar with it either. So we will take that for the record and get back to you.
And so my next question, I guess, is moot now because I was going to ask if each of the panelists would comment on their expectations for the plan and legislative next steps to be taken after the plan is released. In taking back that question for the record, could you also respond to some commentary on the expectations for the plan and the legislative next steps to be taken after the plan is released? I'd appreciate that very much.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, having said that, I use my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sablan. Did I hear you correctly? You're yielding back your time? I take that.
Unless you want that, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Half a day, sir. I now recognize. Yes, thank you. I'd like to now thank all the witnesses for their testimony. Thank you for making it down here and testifying 6 feet apart. And appreciate all the work you do for our veterans. So I'd like to excuse you. I'd now like to recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes for any closing remarks that he may have. Dr. Rowe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I want to thank the VA for all the hard work they've done with the COVID-19 pandemic. This hasn't been easy for anybody. And I know my local VA at home has done a great job. They really essentially enclosed their campus where you have to really limit who comes on and off, which is very smart, I think, to help control this pandemic. And I think we're on the cusp of doing that with the vaccine being approved and then hopefully in the next 10 days or so and out to vulnerable people, many of whom are our nation's veterans. So I want to thank you for that. And the 12 years that I've served here, on this, I've seen dramatic improvements in VA care. I really believe that, and benefits. I mean, 1 million veterans who are on a waiting list to have their disability claims adjudicated, and I think the VA has done a remarkable job in getting those claims adjudicated. And I know there's a buildup now, and there's some frustration with that, but I think under the current leadership that they're doing, and hopefully with the next administration, it'll continue to work on that. So I wanted to thank you all for that. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for your friendship over the past decade. We've had, as we say in the South, we've had a pretty good run. And we've done a lot of good work, I think, this committee has for veterans across this nation. Ray Kelly, thank you, and John Towers, my chief. He's done a great job, and I will never be able to thank you all enough for the kind friendship you've shown me and respect you've shown me. I've really appreciated it. For the Legion and the VFW, my dues are in. I've already gotten my little thing back. I want to make sure MOA, they're on the way, checks in the mail. There's an old bluegrass song. I'm a bit of a bluegrass musician. It's an old song called Will You Miss Me When I'm Gone? I kind of doubt it, because they say here in Congress, if you want a friend, get a dog, and mine died this past year. So I say that kiddingly because it has been an experience of a lifetime and an honor of a lifetime to serve this country and the greatest liberty body in the world, U.S. Congress. So with that, I will sign off, and just as a very appreciative country doctor from East Tennessee. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rowe. And again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for their appearances at their testimony at today's hearing. I think we all can agree that eligibility is a complex issue and one that shouldn't be taken lightly. And I was very pleased to be able to accommodate Ranking Member Rowe's outgoing request for the committee to consider whether it is time to reassess VA healthcare eligibility and benefit design. And I thank you for prodding us into having this hearing. Certainly there will be, no one is going to be able to accuse you of checking out and coasted into retirement, I gotta say. And I want to, really wish you well in your next adventure. I know that this has been a great adventure for you here in the Congress. It is truly a great privilege to be a member of this House, and and it's been a great privilege to be your colleague and to have traveled with you to see our troops during Thanksgiving. That was an idea that you gave me, and I hope to continue that on a bipartisan basis once we're able to travel again. I think it's important for members to, you know what, and the members that I took this last time, you weren't able to join me, but it was very meaningful for especially our junior members to go and travel to see our troops in Afghanistan and other parts of our world. And that was an example you set, and you invited me on that trip, and I never forgot it. And when I became chairman, I said, we've got to do the same thing. And it's just really poignant to see our service members, especially during the holidays. And I just think it's a really good thing for our members to actually make that sacrifice themselves. And you showed us and led the way on that. Gosh, the Mission Act, the expansion of the caregivers program, the Forever GI Bill, making the GI Bill more flexible and having that be a lifetime benefit that doesn't expire. These were things that are living on. These are just some of your legacies, but those are the two big ones I can. And then the Vietnam, the Navy, Blue Water Navy bill. I know that it was the baton passing. Tim Walz, you, me. It was a relay, but we got it over the finish line decades after it should have been done, and we still have more to do for our Vietnam veterans, of which we count you among them. And we thank all the Vietnam veterans, and I always say welcome home to Vietnam veterans, and you're going to be welcomed home soon from this body. Let me just say, I find this job enormously satisfying because of what we can do for the people who've worn the uniform of our country. And those are values that you and I share, and you have taught me a lot by your example. I just explained one of the things you've done, and so I wish you well, sir, and Godspeed, as I say, in your next journey. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And again, thank you for appearing before us today, and this hearing is now adjourned. We'll take a photo.